application in on time.
But I thought they're reappointing him.
No.
Oh, that's right. He's outgoing.
Christine, you ready?
Yes, welcome. I'd like to call to order our June 28th, 2000 meeting of the City Council, including the 28th birthday of my first son today. So, welcome, and let's do a Pledge of Allegiance, please.
We're going to have it brought up to us.
Color guard, front center. Color guard, please prepare to present the colors. Color guard, Vance, Scout salute. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
2. Color guard, post the colors. Color guard, retreat.
Thank you very much. Okay, second item on the agenda. Any changes to the agenda, Mr. Weiss?
We have no changes.
Okay. A report from closed sessions, item number 3. Mr. Rubens?
Mr. Mayor, there are no reportable items from closed session tonight.
Okay. Up to agenda item number 4, council communication and announcements.
Okay,
Please, Mr. Klein?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'll start. Have a handful of things. The first off, and I'm sure Councilman Ahmad will speak a little bit more about this, but on June 19th, or 18th and 19th, we had the vertical challenge at Hiller Aviation Museum. I'm not a big plane guy, but this was a big moment for our town because if any of you have got the Daily Journal insert, we had 2 hometown kids, or not kids now, they're my age and older, hometown St. Carlins actually in the show. I grew up with both of them, so this is a personal thing too. First Lieutenant Ben Bowman with the Army flew a Chinook, and Captain Dan Fust with the Marines flew a Harrier. So it was a big deal for our town. Not only did we have a great air show, but we had 2 people born and raised in San Carlos performing it. And then also this weekend we had the Relay for Life at Carlmont High School, and our mayor will probably speak about this as well. I got to open the ceremony there in the morning on Saturday, so that was a big event. They raised a lot of money for a good cause. And then last, I have a fire board update. We had a fire board meeting last week to clarify the raises that we're getting, which will affect the budget. The bat chiefs this year will be getting a 5.75% raise, and the captains and the firefighters will be getting a 5.5% raise. And that's done with the MOU that was written a handful of years ago. They were to get 2.5% every 6 months, and then every year they would look at the comparable cities, and it's not comparable with San Carlos, it's comparable to the size of the JPA. So they looked at towns with 38 to 103,000 people, and if they fell below the average, they were given a certain bonus as well. So that's why they're not just 5%, they add a couple more. We also had a discussion about hazmat. The hazmat contract came to us for some discussion and direction. The county wants to freeze their contribution to our hazmat program, and the board sent them back letting the county know that we expect them to keep up with the cost increases. So hopefully we'll see a contract that we don't end up having to pay more than our fair share for hazmat, which is a countywide program. And that's all I got.
Thank you. Mr. Mudd?
Mr. Mayor, we just want to echo Councilman Klein's comments about vertical challenge. It was tremendous, and also having the San Carlos flavor is terrific. The only other thing I wanted to add is that we're still in fire season, and folks, we're coming up on July 4th. Sparklers, fireworks, no, don't do that. We will not only wag our fingers, but we will probably send law enforcement.
Mr. Prokop?
I have a thing here that I picked up from a Kiwanis downtown. Met him at the coffee shop, and she gave me this flyer that they're having a wine tasting and sale, live auction and silent auction on Saturday, August 28th at the San Carlos Adult Community Center. I realize that's out there a little bit, but people do make their calendars sometimes months in advance, so that's, again, August 28th. And then the only other item is we did have a ad hoc meeting of the council. Mr. Klein and myself met with Community Development Director to discuss the development along the railroad tracks, and the major emphasis of that meeting had to do with issues around high-speed rail and coordinating the two projects, if you will.
Thank you. Mr. Pasilli?
I have nothing more, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you. And I have nothing. So let's move on. We're up to item number 5. Okay. So if I could have some of the Eagle Scouts here meet me here on the main floor. I have some presentations of our Eagle Scouts Awards. Thank you. Well, welcome. Welcome. So we have here a special recognition. 3 of these gentlemen have attained the status of Eagle Scouts Award. We have Travis Booth, Brian Engel, and Jonathan Thor here with us this evening. So, we have prepared some proclamations, and I'd like to read one of them for you. So, this is in recognition of achieving the Eagle Scout Award, whereas the Boy Scouts of America is a character-building organization comprised of young men who are seeking to prepare themselves for better leaders and citizens for tomorrow in developing those traits and strengths of character of all people. Whereas Scouting plays a vital role in the lives of many hundreds of boys in the city of San Carlos and are guided by a great many adult volunteers who have given generously of their time and talents. And whereas the special and unique honor of achieving the highest award in Scouting has been earned by all 3 of these gentlemen. It's now therefore resolved that I, Randy Royce, Mayor of the City of San Carlos, congratulate each one of them. And so with that, Nathaniel Aaliyah, that's yours. And Brian Egan. Bryce Egan, sorry. Thank you very, very much. And Jonathan Floor.
I'm here to represent Jonathan Floor.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
He's sick.
Okay, and I only have 3. So there should be a 4th. I'm sorry, what is your name?
Travis Booth.
Travis, I'm sorry.
Nope, right here.
Oh, look at that. This is the one that comes with the new Tesla car from our city. The keys are outside in front, and you were chosen from the 4. Do you have your driver's license yet? Yes. You do? Oh, I was hoping you'd say no, and I'd have to drive it home for you. So, Travis, I apologize. Congratulations very much. And I'd like to take this opportunity maybe for each of you to just say a few words about, a project you did for to get this award, please.
Well, once again, I'm standing in for Jonathan Floor. He's sick at the moment, and he built a bench at Water Dog Park. And he is a senior at San Francis.
I did, microphone. Mills Peninsula Hospital area, for the skilled nursing facility, I redid a trellis. Basically sanded it down and basically take it apart, put it back together. That was pretty much my Eagle project.
I renovated an area at Central Middle School, it was this central like area, and kids were like trampling over all these plants. So I put in a walkway as well as a bench for them to sit on, and then put in some hardy, drought-resistant plants so that they wouldn't die.
I did a chicken coop renovation near Cupertino down at a farm. It's called Deer Hollow Farm. You may have been to it. It's a nice park. That's it. Let's give them all a big thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Please. We hope to see one of you guys on City Council here in another 5, 10, 20 years, okay? And next, we have a proclamation here from our Assemblyman Jerry Hill. So, Doug, you want to come up on this one and help me out? Doug Long is our director of our Park and Rec. Here you go. So I had the opportunity with one of Doug's key managers, Donna Giampola Dillard, to attend a luncheon dinner actually 2 weeks ago at Ralston Hall, a beautiful facility, and it was put on by the Sequoia Healthcare District. Sequoia Healthcare every year gives grants to nonprofit organizations. That evening, there, I believe, were 32 organizations with grants totaling about $2.2 million. And these, I'm not going to go through all the names now, but when you hear these organizations, they're just wonderful organizations helping people and organizations of need in the area in which we live. We in the city of San Carlos were able to achieve to get a $50,000 grant for kind of a dual-fold of nutrition. Our seniors lunch program that we have at the Adult Community Center and a nutrition program at our youth center. And so it's through all the continued good work, and it'll be more continued good work that we receive this. So this is from Mr. Hill, Jerry Hill, great man, to the San Carlos Parks and Recreation Department in honor and recognition of outstanding contributions that you have made to the health of the people of San Mateo County. I congratulate you on the occasion of receipt of the 2010-2011 Caring Community Grant from Sequoia Healthcare District, by the Honorable Jerry Hill, this 15th day of June 2010. Mr. Long, congratulations. Going to item 12 very quickly here. Okay, next we have a presentation from the Executive Director of the Traffic Congestion Relief Alliance. Please, welcome. Christine?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Royce, and members of the San Carlos City Council. I'm Christine Maley-Grubel, the Executive Director of the Peninsula Traffic Congestion Relief Alliance. And for those here that may not know who we are a countywide public agency that promotes getting people out of their cars as solo drivers and into carpools, van pools, biking, walking, and on public transit. So I'm here tonight to give you an update on our Alliance's strategic plan, and I also might mention as well, Councilmember Ahmad serves on our board on behalf of the City of San Carlos, and we're pleased to have him involved with our agency. Okay. So we went through a planning process. We have now a new mission statement and program areas. I'm going to also talk about our key goals, objectives, and strategies for each of the program areas and our implementation priorities. Here we go. So we have a new mission statement, which is working together to improve our San Mateo County commute, and we do this by working with employers to develop and manage innovative partnerships to reduce peak period commute trips, with commuters to explore and utilize alternative transportation, and with our public and private partners to collaboratively develop new resources and tools to expand transportation alternatives. So our first program area is working with employers here in the county. I'm going to touch on employer outreach and employer support services in this program area. And as I go along too, or at the end, if you have any questions about our programs, please ask me. So currently, we are working actively with 290 employers, which represent about 108,000 employees here in San Mateo County. So our goal is to increase the market penetration of commute alternatives in the county, and our objective over the next 3 years, it's a 3-year strategic plan, is to increase the number of employees who are taking commute alternative programs by 3%. So some strategies that our strategic planning our plan are to conduct some high-level meetings with the San Mateo County Transit District and CCAG. We are funded by both of these agencies to support their respective goals, market research on initiatives that would lead to increased participation in commute alternative programs. We certainly want to keep the plan updated as we go along too. We see it as a working document. We want to do targeted campaigns in downtown areas and business parks to help build up employer consortiums. We have shuttles that we operate in many cities here in San Mateo County. And also to provide an employer perspective to Samtrans's Comprehensive Operations Analysis TAC, which is a TAC group that will be convening this year to really analyze fixed route service and how shuttles connect up to the fixed route service to ensure that our public transit service and the shuttles as well are operating as efficiently as possible. So some measures of effectiveness include to continue to compare participation not only by employers who currently utilize commute alternative programs with those that don't. Sample those employers as well who aren't currently participating and why aren't they participating. We will also annually calculate peak period auto trips and emissions reduced based on our programs. Another area, program area 1, is employer support services. So here in San Mateo County, we operate the countywide emergency ride home program that provides employees whose employers are signed up for this program an emergency ride during the day if that employee took public transit or carpooled or commute alternatives to work. This provides them with a taxi ride home during the day. We have a bicycle locker program, and also we conduct bicycle safety workshops. So our goal is to provide employer support services to overcome barriers to utilize commute alternatives, and we want to increase employer participation in these support service programs by 5%. Some strategies would include engaging active employers to facilitate participation in additional commute alternatives. So looking at those that are already taking some commute alternative program, they would be a good candidate to perhaps take on another program as well to really have more services and programs to offer to their employees. And we'll also utilize market research and employer outreach to revise and update our programs. Some measures of effectiveness here include employer satisfaction with program delivery and monitoring participation through annual feedback from employers, which we do that through surveys that we conduct. Program Area 2 has to do with working directly with commuters, and I'm just going to touch on direct marketing and communication. So as I mentioned, existing approximately 290 employers, many of these employers that we work with have someone assigned on their staff to actually coordinate the transportation programs for their employees. So we are targeting them. We also attend fairs, certainly employer fairs, transportation and health fairs, and also in the community, some of the community fairs, arts and wine festivals, and other fairs that we can get the word out about commute alternative programs. We continually update our website, which is commute.org, and this website has been structured in a way that people can go directly on the website and apply for many of these incentives directly. So our goal is to provide commute alternative information directly to commuters so that they can make informed choices on commute options. Some objectives are to increase awareness in the Alliance's programs. We conducted a phone survey of residents here in San Mateo County about a year and a half ago, and based on that survey, about 25% of those that participated were aware of the Alliance in our programs. We want to see that increase over the next 3 years, and we have a target of 33%. We'll conduct another survey of that kind within the next 3 years to gauge that. We want to certainly increase website usage, and we want to receive a high satisfaction rate on our follow-up surveys, which we have been doing. We want to continue to increase, of course, the level of satisfaction by those who are using our programs. So some strategies here include developing marketing plans to enhance effectiveness in directly reaching commuters, continuing media campaigns targeting San Mateo County commuters, develop protocols for determining which fairs and events will be the most beneficial for really for our customer, the employer, or if it's a community fair, and also to ensure that we're utilizing our time in the most efficient way. And we'll continue to certainly do some updates to our website to make it as user-friendly as possible. So some measures of effectiveness here include awareness of our programs in periodic general public surveys and looking at the percentage of employers exposed to marketing efforts to try a commute alternative. The third program area, there's 4 in the strategic plan, it has to do with working with our public and private partners. So in this case, we're looking at funding and resource development. We want to certainly maintain the current funding that we have existing, and we want to look in the future for other funding sources when they would become available and when that would make sense for us to pursue those. In working with our the transit agency and certainly with the cities and within the community, be a partner in developing community-based mobility services. So not only these employer shuttles that are taking people back and forth from BART and Caltrain, but also shuttle services and other services as well that would make sense within communities to get people in and around that best meets the transportation needs of that particular community. And community facilitation of transportation alternatives, which really has to do with getting the word out about our programs directly to the community and making them more aware of what we're doing. Fourth area is internal to the Alliance, having to do with our finance and our budget. We now have restructured our budget and our annual work plan so that it complements the strategic plan. Our Alliance Board just had their meeting last week and approved that budget moving forward. It now goes to our funding agency partners as well, to their boards for feedback and or approval. Governance, we want to ensure that our board members are getting the most that they need to get out of being a part and a participant, I should say, in the Alliance. So we want to work as closely as we can with them to make it make sense for our board members. Administration and business practices, just some things in general related to, we have a great staff at the Alliance that have been there for quite a while, and I want to ensure that they continue in their positions and are motivated in what they do. So we'll look at different ways of ensuring that that is the case. And then communication is the general awareness of the Alliance. So from the strategic plan, the recommendations that were made and from all the feedback that was provided from our stakeholders, which included our board members, but it also included our funding agency partners as well, they came up with a checklist related to how the Alliance would be prioritizing what we do. The things that we are to consider as we move forward are certainly our contractual obligations, cost effectiveness of our programs, annual mobility benefits, and sustainability of funding sources. So the number one priority here would be to fulfill the obligations of our current funding agreements with our funders, the Transportation Authority and with CCAG, and then reallocating our resources in order to meet our goals and objectives. And these were then put in this order of priority initially, and as I said, it's our strategic plan is a living document, as we would say, so we will continue to modify it as we receive feedback and do the research that was mentioned earlier. So the number one thing would be outreach to large employers to use ride-sharing and tri-transit incentives. Secondly, campaigns aimed at medium and small employers in targeted areas to provide ride-sharing and tri-transit. Then employer-based shuttle programs, employer-based support services such as emergency ride home, community-based shuttles, bicycle parking incentives, and these aren't all the programs that we have, but these are some key ones. Then another thing that was recognized through our discussion throughout the strategic planning process was to ensure that the Alliance as well is at the table when we're discussing legislative efforts such as Assembly Bill 32 and how that may be implemented here in the county. We want to be sure that the Alliance is is available to provide the programs and feedback that would make sense in order to move forward with our TDM programs that would be helpful related to that. So last slide here has to do with some things just recently here in the city of San Carlos. Again, we really appreciated having a bike energizer station for Bike to Work Day last month here at the Caltrain station. Overall, in San Mateo County, participation was up 18% this year. The Alliance, through our staff, coordinates the efforts countywide, and we work with the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition on putting on Bike to Work Day. I mentioned a couple of employers here in San Carlos because they are employers that we've done some work with recently, having to do with just assisting them with transportation fares, Nectar and Novaris, assisting them with doing employee surveys, the surveys having to do with finding out where their employees live versus where they work to help them figure out how best to provide commute alternative programs. And they've been really supportive of looking at putting programs in place and also doing a GIS map, which is really pinpointing where the employees live versus where they work. I have a staff person who does outreach here in San Carlos, and she's working with the city's staff person here on coordinating a bicycle safety workshop. The date hasn't been scheduled yet, but this is going to be a free workshop, and it's available to the community here, to residents, and also to people that work in San Carlos, providing bicycle safety tips and bike maintenance for your bike, and its certified instructor will be conducting the workshop. So once we have that date, we'll certainly get the word out about that. And then finally, too, through the Chamber of Commerce, Kim Comstock, who is the staff person that does outreach work here in San Carlos, has been participating on the Green Committee for the Chamber, and we've been really pleased to be able to be a part of that. Finally, if you may be interested in copies of the strategic plan, I'm certainly happy to email that or mail those to you. It's also available as well on our website, which is commute.org. And I do appreciate your time this evening, and happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Great. Well, thank you for coming. Any questions? Anybody? Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Moving on to item 6 on our agenda. This deals with our youth center, which is merely a building that was built about 10 years ago with a lot of generosity of our citizens of San Carlos, but it doesn't all happen unless you have the people. We have a youth advisory council, and we're here to recognize those people in our youth advisory council. Mr. Long? This is consideration of appointing Youth Advisory Council voting members for the 2010-2012 term in recognition of retiring Youth Advisory Council voting members.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the Council. A Youth Advisory Council interview panel interviewed candidates interested in serving on the 2010-2011 Youth Advisory Council. I'd like to give a special thank you to Councilman Member Klein for serving on the panel. And the panel has made their recommendations and now presents them to the City Council for consideration and appointment. But before I introduce the 5 candidates, I would like to recognize the retiring members of the Youth Advisory Council. Henry Zadarang. Henry could not be here this evening, but we would like to thank him for his 2 years of service on the Council. And I would like to invite Previn Naidu to the podium to accept a plaque in recognition of his 2 years of service, one of which was served as treasurer. Now I'd like to introduce the 5 recommended candidates. As I call your name, if you wouldn't mind stepping forward. Kevin Harris, Menlo School. He's a junior, 2-year term. Kevin is seeking a second appointment and is interested in promoting community service in and outside the San Carlos community. Kevin is also interested in developing a working relationship with the San Carlos School District. He has worked hard the last 2 years and is presently the vice chair. Alex Kuamoto, Carlmont High School freshman, 2-year term. Alex is seeking his second appointment and has worked hard the last 2 years on the YAC. He is interested in involving more youth in local government by putting together a movie documentary on the Youth Activities Center. He would like to contribute his efforts, share his ideas, and help the San Carlos community. Lauren Vogel, Mercy Burlingame Jr., 2-year term. Lauren is seeking her second appointment and has been on the Youth Activities Council Advisory Council for the past 4 years, 2 as a voting member, and is our current secretary. Lauren would like to pursue avenues to assist our youth in caring for the environment and partnering with other agencies that have existing programs for youth. Clara Cruz, Carlmont High School senior, 1-year term. Claire is very active in Girl Scouts. She is currently an ambassador. She is involved in the Leader Reader program through the Belmont Library and will like the YAC to start a literacy program here in San Carlos. Claire would like to see the YAC implement some intergenerational events in the city. Thank you. And last, Jack Carlson could not be here this evening. He is from Tierra Linda School, and he's in the 8th grade, and he'll be serving a 2-year term. So I'd like to ask our city clerk to swear in the members.
Okay, everyone?
Through the chair, do we need to make a motion, Mr. Rubens, on this before we get sworn in?
That's correct.
Okay,
Councilor
thank you.
Chili.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to appoint these young people to the Youth Advisory Council voting members for 2010-2012 and recognize the retiring Youth Advisory Council voting members.
I'll second that. Okay, first and second, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, we're all set. Thank you.
That was close. Okay, can you all raise your right hand, please? Oops. Guess I should stand over here. Do you solemnly swear that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that you take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which you are about to enter? Okay, thank you. And we have your oaths. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Welcome aboard. Thank you.
Okay, congratulations, everybody. Thank you. Okay, on to item 7, public comment. Public comment is a section area where public's able to speak and encouraged to speak on any items that are not on this evening's agenda. I have, I believe, about 5 speaker cards. Darwin Padnode, come on up. Brian Randall, Pat Bell, and maybe next you, and I'll read a couple other names here. Welcome, Darwin. Hi.
Thank you. First, I want to commend Mayor Randy Royce for his recent comments to the media, wherein he pointed out the disadvantages of submitting some outsourcing issues to a vote on a November ballot. What the media didn't report was, of course, that doing that would cost approximately $100,000, something not in the city budget, something that would cost the actual likely voting person in San Carlos about almost $10 per person. So I commend Mayor Royce on that. When I'm not here, I'm also at home watching the meetings on television. And I notice that when topics come up, quite often the first words out of some mouths are, well, what about our employees? How can we save the employees? How can we help our staff, etc.? That's commendable for its sensitivity, but I'd also like to say that I would really love it if the first words out of your mouth were, is this good for San Carlos? What would the taxpayers say? How do the residents and voters who elected us feel about this? So please think of that as you're considering all the issues. And finally, let me say that many aspects of the outsourcing proposals seem to me to be very good and long overdue, and I hope that you will pursue them as effectively as you can. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian Randall, come on up. Hi, Brian. And if Pat Bell could be ready.
Gentlemen, good evening. My name is Brian Randall. I live in San Carlos. This evening, I'm going to talk about the bottom line. In an emergency, I want the best, not the cheapest. And anyone who does not has the wrong bottom line as their priority. The real bottom line in life is when you cannot get your next breath. We have the best now. Don't lose it. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I did want to be careful that we're talking about items that are not on this evening's agenda. I'm not sure where that was directed, but please try to.
I'm going in another direction
Thank you.
entirely for that reason.
Pat, welcome.
In the first paragraph of the Brown Act, it says that this council exists to aid in the conduct of the people's business. And like the first speaker tonight, I'd like to remind you of that and ask you to think about that. The second paragraph starts, the people of this state do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies which serve them. You serve us. You do not serve the city manager or the assistant city manager. You're not supposed to come in with your own agenda and bulldoze it through. You're supposed to serve the citizens of San Carlos. You have spent a lot of time sitting while people comment on your actions, but you don't listen. You just go on with your agenda. And when the citizens tried to horn in on the action and really take action to change things in San Carlos, Andy Klein was so incensed that he had to give an illegal 3-minute speech to add to his list of Brown Act violations, which is getting longer and longer and longer and longer. I think you guys and your arrogance, and which I'm sure you'll exercise again tonight, you're embarrassing. You are making a laughingstock of this town. I can tell you the people who say, what the heck is going on down there? And for that gentleman, I wish he were here tonight, who says, you get rid of those bums over there, you'll save $500,000. And you three,
wrap up.
The Brown Act specifically prohibits you
So, Pat, if you could summarize, please.
interrupting him.
Yeah. Wrap up, please. Thank you.
When a member of the public testifies before a legislative body, the body may not prohibit the individual from criticizing the policies, procedures, programs, or services of the agency or the acts or omissions of the body.
Pat, I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Next, we have Eric Daniel and Andrew Williams. Eric? Hi, welcome. Come on up.
I believe I'm listed in here. I wanted to comment on an item on the agenda, so I'm going to defer till later.
That'd be great. Thank you very, very much.
You want to know which item that is?
And can you make sure, what is the item? Is it agenda item what? 11. Okay, I'll note that. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Williams, come on up. Hi.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I'm Andrew Williams from Belmont, so I did cross the border.
You are allowed to speak. Come on.
The last one. But anyway, to your surprise, and I'm probably going to get shot when I go back to the other side. I want to compliment you. I have been dealing with building inspectors since April, and they're very efficient. I had a project here that the house was basically condemned, and Phil, he's the supervisor, I believe, in the inspection department, and I have worked with Matt. I don't know if you people know Matt or not, but I guess he was a general contractor before, and I didn't know him before either, but I have worked with him for 3 months now, and they have done an outstanding job. And I have helped with Belmont too, and they're much better because they have this one stop where you can get your permits and licenses. So the bottom line, what I'm trying to say is that I hear that some of the people in the building department, for example, like Matt, is going to be let go. And I think it's a big mistake because that's where your lifeline is. That's where you make one-on-one contact. And that's where money comes in. And if we delay these projects, you actually delay your income. So I very seriously want you to reconsider that. And I don't know him personally or anything, and I don't know Phil either, but they're doing a very good job. Your system is working, and don't break it now. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're moving on to item 8. This is approval of the consent calendar. Consent calendar are items considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. There'll be no separate discussion unless members of the council or the public or staff ask items to be pulled and specific items be removed for separate action. So with that, move for a motion here.
Mr. Mayor, can I pull 8H just for a question of clarification?
H.
And I can get it done in 2 seconds if you let me.
Got that? Anything else, Mr. Grocott?
Yes, I'd like to pull C, D, and G.
C, D, and
G.
G. Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Mr. Groh. Okay. So I have C, D, G, and H. Hear a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve items A, B, E, F, and I on the consent calendar.
Second.
We have a first and a second. Roll call.
Councilmember Mon?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Klein?
Yes.
Mayor Royce?
Yes. Okay, so what I'll do on those 4 items, I usually try to get through those right away, but due to the audience and people waiting around, I think, for the agenda number 11, I'm going to move these to the end of the meeting. After 11, we'll talk through those at that point of time. Okay. 9 are reports to council. Mr. Weiss, any reports?
We have no additional reports.
No reports. Okay. So just to let everybody know, we have 2 items under 10 under finished business and then new business 11A coming up. So first, under unfinished business 10A is consideration adopting a resolution of the City Council authorizing the city manager to award contracts to Gachina Landscape Management and Echo Landscape for maintenance service. Mr. Long, you have a short report on that?
Yes, I'll be very brief, Mr. Mayor. Doug Long, Parks and Recreation Director. At the June 14, 2010 City Council meeting, the City Council authorized the city manager to prepare contracts with the Gachina Landscape Management and Echo Landscape for maintenance services. The city manager has prepared the attached contracts, and they'll be attached to your report, for council approval, and we're seeking authorization for the city manager to award these contracts. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. And I just also want to remind you once again that we do have representatives from Gachina Landscape Maintenance here if you have any questions for them.
Questions? Mr. Grocott.
I just had one question, and this was brought to my attention by a member of the audience at the last meeting where we looked at this, and that was they were asking about the verification of Social Security numbers of people who work for us, essentially, through Gachina, and if there's a process for that.
Yes, there is. There is a process to verify Social Security numbers for each one of their employees.
That there is a process that will be used?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Hear a motion?
Mr. Mayor, move adoption of resolution number 2010-.
53.
Resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos authorizing city manager award contracts for maintenance services to Gachina Landscape Maintenance and Echo Landscape.
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, roll call?
Councilmember Mod?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Klein?
Yes.
Mayor Royce?
Yes. 10B is consideration of council resolution to adopt tentative management group salary and benefit resolution. Mr. Weiss?
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, the item before you is an item that we've been discussing for some time relating to salaries and benefits for the management group. As the council is aware, we've begun the Meet and Confer project for many of the labor units within the city, and the charge has been to try and obtain some concessions from the labor groups as part of the budget process so that we can make strides towards balancing our budget. The item before you is specific to the management employees. It relates to about 20 employees within the city of San Carlos. The term of the agreement, as outlined within the staff report, is a 2-year term, and I should note that this is an addition. This equates to about a 5.3% reduction in total. It's in addition to 2.75% this fiscal year that has been granted previously a few months back. As you might remember, this year was to be the 3rd year of an agreement that the management group had entered into 3 years ago with the City Council that provided for a 2.75% increase this fiscal year. That was in consideration of some concessions that were made in the prior agreement relating to a second tier for benefit packages or second tier for retirement packages, as well as other concessions such as the elimination of the pay for performance program and the like. As we approached the 3rd year, our budget situation continued to get worse, and so we talked with the management group and agreed to suspend the 3rd year of the agreement, and so that 2.75% raise that was to be awarded July 1st was no longer in effect. The terms before you tonight reduced base compensation from existing employees an additional 5.3%. That includes salary adjustments, reductions in holiday pay, the elimination of payouts for vacation accrual, another tier to the retirement program moving forward. That's an item that will need to be negotiated with all of the bargaining units to be effective. Freezes to the city's contribution to health, dental, vision plans, elimination of the deferred compensation program that the city had in place on behalf of the management employees, and some other minor adjustments to the contract that are itemized within the report. I'm pleased to report to you that we've met with the management group. They're in agreement with making these concessions in consideration. Obviously, it's only part of the solution. The action you just took with respect to the contracts for parks maintenance has a value in the neighborhood of $400,000. This has a value in the neighborhood of $250,000 in addition to the $100 and some thousand that deferral of the increase in July had. The difficulty, of course, is when you've got a $3.5 million deficit, this doesn't get us to where we need to be in terms of balancing the budget. And in accordance with that, we have other items on the agenda starting this evening. But this is before you for approval this evening. We will then continue to work with the other bargaining units in an effort to make progress in those arenas as well. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Questions?
Yeah, I'll start. Mr. Weiss, you talked about, so in March, the management group came and they gave back that 2.75% COLA, and then now they're giving up 5.3%. So for this coming up fiscal year, that's an 8% give back total, correct? Okay, and then my other question is about the retirement. We are going to 2% at 55, and if I do my math right, and there's a little section in this report, so prior to 2009, our management employees were given 2% at 55?
Prior to 2009?
Yeah, well, I'm looking, it says for employees hired before March 16, 2009, the city provides the PERS 2.7% at 55.
2.7 at 55.
2.7.
Correct.
Oh, sorry.
2.7.
Okay. So that accounts to, if you work for 30 years, you get 81% of your highest pay.
Correct.
At 55 years or over.
Correct.
Okay. And then after 2009, we went to 2.5% at 55, which translates to 75% of your highest pay.
Correct.
Now we're going to 2 at 55, which is 60% of your, and now we change it. Instead of highest pay, you take your 3 highest years and you get the average.
Correct.
So there's no chance of spiking or anything like that because you have to get an average, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a pretty significant change in a, this won't take a credit till 2012, but that's a pretty significant change in 3 years.
Yes.
Okay. I have nothing else. Those are my only questions.
Any other questions? Mr. Gokart?
Yeah, I read through this, the portion of the actual agreement, not just the changes. And I wanted to get some understanding on some things. So the first item is item 4, administrative leave. It says members of the management group receive 80 hours of administrative leave each January 1. Can you explain what's that intended for?
Management employees, not only here, but I mean throughout most organizations, most public organizations, there's a recognition that the management employees go to a lot of night meetings. Staff commissions are attending functions throughout the city and the like. They don't get overtime pay and so on. In many cities, in fact, most cities, there's some recognition of that through the provision of administrative leave to offset the fact that overtime is not granted for those employees.
So it's to compensate for overtime that's not paid.
I think generally that's the philosophy, yes.
Okay. The next question I have, I've read this over and over again, and it doesn't make sense to me when I read it. On holidays, the regular full-time employees in established positions shall be entitled to take all authorized holidays at full pay, not to exceed 8 hours for any one day, provided they are in a pay status on both their regularly scheduled work days immediately preceding and following the holiday. What does that mean?
I'd probably have to refer you to the attorneys if we're going to start to have legal interpretations of the exact language here. But the idea is that employees that are full-time employees before and after the holidays will get recognition and credit for those holidays. So they'll be compensated for 40 hours even though the holidays take place.
Okay, so it doesn't mean, for instance, if the holiday is on a Monday, that you don't get credit for it because you weren't working the day before. If you weren't that kind of employee, that's not what it means.
I mean, I don't understand the interpretation, but it basically means that the employees are being paid for 40 hours a week, irrespective of whether a holiday occurs or not.
I can speak to this. It deals with the fact that whether or not people are on leave without pay. If you're on leave without pay and you're basically still on the books, but you're inactive for a period of time, you wouldn't receive a paid holiday during that leave without pay status.
That makes sense. Okay. Okay. And then there's another item here, 6.1, about entitlement under vacation. And it says all employees who hold full-time positions are entitled to 12 working days vacation pay upon successful completion of their first year. So that makes sense to me. After you finish your first year, then you're entitled to 12 working days of vacation. But then it says employees may take accrued vacation after completion of 6 months service. So does that mean after the first year you can do that? Because you certainly can't do it in the first year, it doesn't sound like. Those two statements seem to be in conflict with each other unless you just think of them after the first year.
Yeah, in the management group, there are circumstances where managers are hired, senior level managers from other agencies, and they're allowed to accrue vacation or bring over vacation balance right from the beginning. It's rare, but it does happen. So I think the language would be speaking to those instances. The second section you talked about. You can't take vacation if you haven't accrued any, but there are instances where new employees have vacation on the books.
Doesn't seem, that's not, the language there is not clear. I understand what you're saying, but that's not what this says. So to me, that's not clear. And Then there's a part in here, 6.3, that says the city manager may designate up to 5 days specific work days in each calendar year between Christmas and New Year's, during which employees may be required to take time off. So those are the furloughs we talk about.
Correct.
So how does that work for management employees? Because, you know, if your salary's $190,000 a year, it's $190,000 a year. Does it drop down if you're forced to take this time off?
We burn time that is accrued vacation time or the like. And you'll find, for example, during that period of time, most of your management employees, many of us are available by cell phone. We're still doing the work that's required, especially if there's emergency services, flooding, or the like. But we're burning our vacation time. That period of time.
Or your administrative leave or your sick leave.
Not sick leave.
You can't use sick leave that way. Can you use sick leave only for sick leave?
Yes.
Okay. But you could use your administrative leave time.
Yes.
For something like that. Okay. And the last thing I just, is not really a question, I guess it's a, you know, we've already, as I said, well, I'm not sure what I can say here.
Careful.
Yeah. There's an item on here that to me, I appreciate all the things that were negotiated, but one of the things I didn't think about when we were negotiating is this monthly auto allowance of $250 a month. And I think we could get a better, you know, I look at these positions that get this, and if you plug in I think it's about 55 cents right now is the current, you know, if you turn in your mileage and get paid back, it's about 55 cents right now, isn't it? Something like that?
Yeah, I'm not current on what the value is.
It's close to that. So if you divide that into the 250, that's 450 miles a month. I don't think any of these people are driving around that much in their own vehicles at 450 miles a month or 113 miles a week. So I think we could get, you know, better value if we didn't offer this anymore and actually had people turn in their mileage for whatever they're using their own personal vehicles. But
so with that, is there any proposals or any changes you're recommending to this?
That's the one.
The last one?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any interest in any other council members to pursue that?
Are we just asking questions first and then discussing? Because we're going to have...
Yeah, we're at question stage right now, and I just went through all my items.
Okay. Any other questions? Matt, do you have others?
No questions. There's some things when I asked about these things that I would like to discuss with council.
Okay. Other questions?
No, just Mr. Mudd. Mr. Weiss, one of the challenges that we've had on council is we're hearing management is just not giving enough. You know, that we got a bunch of fat cats sitting up on the second floor of City Hall and they're not doing anything. I just want to get this clear. This management unit was supposed to get a 2.75% increase. They turned that down without us really asking. And we've come back and now we're getting additional funds that this group is giving back. And I just did the back of the envelope. It looks like about 20% or so for the new employees. Their pensions are going to go down about 20% from a high of something like 80% of top salary down to about 60. Is that correct? Am I getting this right?
I mean, yes.
Okay, so the management unit has, I think a way to describe it is they got some skin in this game, don't they?
They have a lot of skin in this game, as you would put it, both in terms of the deferral that was taken in July, as well as in the actual concession and the cuts being proposed here. But if you would actually go back to the contract that was negotiated prior to this, there were additional concessions, numerous additional concessions made by the management group as part of the prior contract. So this is consistent with, I think, adjustments that have been made by the management group and frankly, many of our employee groups for the prior years. The difficulty, as I said, is even with these concessions, we're talking about a few $100,000, which is good, but we've got a $3.5 million budget deficit.
Mr. Mayor, that's the end of my questions. I would have a comment later.
Can I jump in real quick with one final question?
Sure.
City Manager Weiss. What is the lowest percentage that CalPERS allows currently?
I believe it's 2%. They will allow it for different variables in terms of what the retirement age is.
Okay, so we're at the lowest percentage, not the
That's my understanding.
not the oldest, but the lowest percentage.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, that was my only question.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Motion here. Matt, you want to bring up your point first, maybe, and see how that goes?
Shouldn't we have public comment first, Mr. Mayor?
Sure. I didn't have any speaker cards. Would anybody like to speak on this item? Ms. Bell, please.
I applaud management for coming up with this. I have heard the same things Mr. Ahmad referred to. Unfortunately, it's very late in the game to come up with this concession, and we haven't heard about concessions from any of the other employee groups. So we're outsourcing whole departments here, and we haven't really pursued this kind of thing in a meaningful way. Other cities are doing 15%. Cal Fire, where Andy wants us to get our fire service, just did 15%. So I think this is great. 8% is great. If we did 15% for the whole city, we'd be almost there. We already saved $1 million tonight out of 3.5. A couple more nights, you got it done.
Thank you, Pat. Anybody else like to speak on this? Brian, please. Brian, can you come up, please? Yeah. Okay, come on. Good. Gentlemen, Brian Randall, San Carlos. Seeing that our upper management has suddenly decided to take a decrease, may I go back to our police department to see if they will match it? I don't know what our police officers want, but I want them to stay as they are. They have served me well for 40 years. For all I know, they may be sick and tired of the recent treatment here, but I don't know that. I want to see them stay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Anybody else like to speak on item 10B?
Mr. Mayor, I move adoption of resolution number 2010- resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos adopting the salary and benefit resolution between the City of San Carlos and the management unit.
You're a second on that?
I'll second.
Okay, first and second.
Are you guys having any discussion?
Before we vote on that, please, Mr. Grovat?
So the reason I brought up and I asked for some clarification on some things is I'm not pleased with 6.1, the language of it. It's unclear, and I think it needs to be clear. When I look at all these different items, administrative leave, holidays, and vacation, even in an employee's first year, because a vacation adjusts as you're on board for, more years of service. Administrative leave is 80 hours or 2 weeks. Holidays, you add them up, it's 80 hours or 2 weeks. Even in your first year of employment, you get 12 days of vacation. That's 2 weeks and 2 days, essentially, if you think of a work week. After 4 years, you're up to 16 days, so that's 3 weeks vacation plus an extra day. And I add all that up, and that to me is a lot of time off for any employee, whether it's management or any other. And I guess if I were to dig into this, or if we were to dig into this, I think the schedule on the vacation accrual is a little generous, and 2 weeks of administrative leave seems generous. I take what Mr. Weiss has said about, well, it's, the philosophy is it's to pay, these people don't get overtime. Well, of course they don't get overtime. It's a position where you're running the business essentially, and when you run the business, you don't get paid overtime. That's the role you're in, and when you're in administration, you don't get paid overtime. You do the job, and you get a salary, and you're supposed to get the job done no matter how many hours it takes. If you own a company, that's the way it works. So this idea of administrative leave, I am just not pleased with. And then lastly, I think we've reached a time where $250 a month for car allowance is too generous and not something that we should afford ourselves or afford our people that are in management. I think as they use their vehicles, if they choose some of these positions, they could use city vehicles. For instance, community development director or chief building official. I think we have vehicles that are available. But in any regard, thinking that somebody drives around here 450 miles a month going to wherever, I don't know where they're going, but I think we could save some on that if we negotiated that away and just said, turn in your expense report and we'll pay it.
So, Mr. Burkhardt, would you, I know your comments are, discussing our resolution that we have right now before us. Are you looking at making it amended, or that's just your discussion on your comments and recommendations on this item?
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor.
How would you want to handle
I don't
that?
think an item like this we can, I'd look to the city attorney, but we can't change it here at this dais. We'd have to go back into closed session if we wanted to discuss these items any further and actually, or send them back to the labor group, the management group, for negotiation.
Okay. Mr. Evans, how do you recommend we handle this one?
If there is a desire by the council to amend the resolution, I think that is the proper course to have it go back to the management group and potentially a further closed session item to discuss any potential changes.
Okay. Okay. So I think we can take the vote then and find that out, correct?
One bit of discussion, Mr. Mayor.
Sure. Please.
I just had to pull out my PDA. It's not that I'm twittering, but one of the things I do is I do keep a mileage log. So there was an assertion that 400 miles is actually, or 450 miles if you want to do 55 cents. I'm looking at my meetings for the city, and I'm averaging about 400 miles a month. So I got to imagine city staff does at least what I do, maybe some more. I have a number of regional appointments, so I do go out and represent the city on different things. These are not mandated, but I do that. So the idea, I've never turned in an expense report. I know that there's a form that you could probably do, but just as a function of principle, I'll never turn in an expense report. But for just a basis of comparison, this is what I'm doing as vice mayor. I imagine other city staff does the same. If there is an opportunity to move people to city-owned cars, I would encourage it.
Okay. Other thoughts before we take the vote?
Yeah, one issue, and I'm going to vote for this, but with the 2% of 55, I just think it's value in saying that, I wanted to see a farther push out, but 2% was my big deal. I wanted to get to that first, and I think we can fight another day about when it's proper to retire in this day and age. But I think that the 2% was my main goal, so I'm going to keep my mouth shut about the other one right now, and then we'll just move on.
Okay. Good. Recommend we call the vote. You ready?
Councilman Armand?
Yes.
Councilman Vasili?
Yes.
Councilman Burkhardt?
Well, I suppose if this is as good as we're going to get, then I'll vote yes on it.
Councilman Klein?
Yes.
Mayor Royce?
Yes. Great, thank you. Okay, 11, new business, last item on our agenda other than the items that were pulled from the consent calendar. This is consideration authorization for the city manager to negotiate a contract for police services and authorization for staff to propose contracting for police services to the Police Officers Association. Just a little introduction here on process, because this is a very, very important item. Let you know what we're doing. We will be having a presentation by staff and, I believe, our consultant on this area. Next will be questions from City Council. There then will be public comment. It's where we're encouraging public to take their 2 minutes and give us any thoughts that you have or questions that you have on this measure. We'll close public comment. There'll be discussion among City Council, and then we will be voting on this item. So with that, let me turn it over to Mr. Mark Weiss. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. The item is entitled is Consideration of Authorization to Negotiate a Contract for Police Services, and that's important because we're not asking for a decision tonight. We're asking for you to give us further direction. If you think that after looking at the documentation that's been provided you, after hearing the presentations from the county sheriff and from the city of Redwood City, if you believe that this concept has merit, we would look to you tonight to give us authorization to proceed down this path, to continue working on it, perhaps selecting one of the two entities, either the city of Redwood City and the county, or the county, and authorize us actually to negotiate a contract with them, and at the same time authorize us to propose the concept to the to officially and formally propose the concept to the Police Officers Association. But again, no decision is expected tonight with respect to the decision with regard to the outsourcing concept per se. Just by way of a little background, and this council is very familiar with the history that has gotten us here. 10 years plus of annual cuts. One of the first meetings that I attended amongst the staff back in 2005 upon my arrival with the city was a budget cutting session mid-year. It was hard to fathom at that point, given how the economy was churning along quite nicely, why the city of San Carlos was in the midst of budget cuts during a time when property values were going up. The economy seemed to be in good shape, but that was where San Carlos was. In the initial years after that or subsequent to that, we reorganized, we streamlined, we made it a more vertical organization, we reduced the number of department heads, created some mid-management positions to replace those. We cut the number of personnel from 126 to 107, including some layoffs that are occurring this year. Reached a point that in mid-2008, I addressed the City Council and suggested to you that despite all of the reductions that we had made up to that juncture, that we had truly reached the tipping point. And it was a book that had been printed at that time that talked about the concept of a tipping point where you reach a certain point where changes happen very, very quickly. And I thought that we were at that junction in 2008, that we had trimmed, we had cut, we had reorganized, we had done a number of things to try and make the city more efficient without noticeable consequences within the city perhaps, but that those days were soon to end, that the reductions that we were looking forward to in the coming years were going to be much more dramatic, much more draconian, and much more noticeable by the citizenry of San Carlos. We recommended at that time that we declare a fiscal emergency and put an item on the ballot in 2008 for a revenue measure to give the opportunity for the community at that time to determine whether or not it wanted to sustain the current level of services with a supportive revenue measure. We did not get the necessary unanimous vote of the City Council in order to accomplish that at that time. Of course, later that year, we had a fiscal collapse within the country. That was after we had asked the Council to declare the fiscal emergency. And that's an important point, because what we're talking about now is not a blip. It's not a minor thing that is facing the city. It's not something that's going to be easily corrected once we actually get out of the current recession. This is a systemic problem that has been with the city for a number of years prior to the economic recession and collapse that we're currently experiencing. We put a measure on last year. It didn't require the unanimous vote. In Measure U in 2009, it failed in the city of San Carlos, and so in the last 6 years we've had 2 fire measures fail, and we've had Measure U, which was a general tax that failed. It became clear to staff at that point, multiple attempts to address the issue from a revenue standpoint within the city of San Carlos, that the desire within this community to pay for services through additional taxes simply did not exist. Well, where we are today is that the revenue projection for next year's base budget, which is to sustain the current service level, is a $3.5 million deficit. It's over 10% of your general fund budget. The graphic, I'm stalled here for some reason, Jeff. There we go. The graphic depiction is what you saw there before. It's simply the chart goes like this. I mean, you end up not having the revenues to support the expenditures that you're incurring. In the base budget over the last 5 years, this depicts what's happened there. You can see that we've cut, and these are real numbers. These are not adjusted for inflation or anything like that. Administrative services has been cut from $2.8 to $2 million. That's a 27% reduction. Parks and Recreation has been cut by 12.6%, 5.1 to 4.5 million. Police and fire expenses, our public safety expenses, have gone from roughly 50% of our budget to over 60%. Fire has grown by 30%. Police has grown by 21.2%. And the important thing to recognize there is that police has grown by 21.2%, despite the fact that we've reduced a number of positions within the department. We've contracted out dispatch, and despite those cuts, the budget has grown. And we can talk about the reason for that. We've talked about it repeatedly with the City Council. Much of it has to do with the fact that benefits were granted back in the early 2000 to 2004 period that were established in arrears for employees that were here at the time. Those benefits created a side fund that need to be paid irrespective of whether or not those employees, most of those employees have retired, they're gone, and yet the side fund is there, we're having to pay for that. That's been incorporated into our rates with PERS. In effect, we're asking current employees to make salary concessions to pay for benefits that were granted to a previous generation of employees. And you're doing the same thing in terms of trying to pay for benefits that were granted by a previous generation of City Council members or a previous generation of management staff. The city has to balance its budget. I've talked many times about, we can't print money like the feds, we can't steal money like the state. We have to balance our budget. And so when we began this budget year, I asked for each of the departments to give me 20% budget cuts so that we could see what the impact would be and that we could balance our budget, because the revenue stream simply wasn't going to be there to support the current level of service. We, in going through that process, considered a number of cuts, salaries and benefits. We've done some of that, obviously, this evening. More work is still to be done. Outsourcing parks maintenance is something, again, that was on this evening's agenda, was in both paths as we talked about them at the budget. Reducing public counter hours, we've done that a number of times over the recent years. But we also talked about closing parks. We talked about closing the youth and the adult services, or the adult community center. We talked about eliminating the residential design review program and no longer doing the tree removal permits, eliminating code enforcement in our town. We've talked about shutting off street lights, but more importantly, we talked about additional cuts to public safety, and that's because public safety is 60% of our budget, and much of the other 40% is tied up in mandated obligations of the city to respond to regional water quality permits or building permits or other things that are mandated in terms of city obligations. The important point is that if you're going to balance the budget with this kind of a deficit, you need to make further reductions into your public safety. And in talking with the police chief, it became apparent to me that our police department would no longer be sustainable in any real way if we continue to make cuts in personnel, if we continue to make cuts in payroll. And part of that first initiative that was routed here in the last week or so that has been reviewed by the city attorney didn't propose just maintaining the current police department. It talked about restoring it to 2002 levels and raising the salaries. And you can understand the reason for that. I mean, it's difficult to sustain a viable police department when you're paying 20% less than Redwood City, or you're paying 10 or 15% less than the county sheriff. In order to actually have a viable department, we believe it's necessary to actually, address real issues in terms of coming up with the department and a compensation package that's competitive, that allows you to be competitive in the marketplace. Fire is another whole separate issue. It's difficult there because we share a fire department with the Belmont San Carlos Fire Department. We need to come to a meeting of the minds before we can make real reductions. At the staff level, we talked about perhaps browning out or closing a fire station. The difficulty there is that we would lose 50% by closing a station, but we would only realize a 12% savings because of the formula that is currently in place with the Belmont San Carlos Fire Department, because most of the factors that determine what we pay for fire service in that current formula is predicated upon population, predicated upon assessed valuation, the number of calls from your community, and then companies. Companies is one of four factors. But it becomes apparent that you can't really control your own destiny with respect to fire under the current formula and format that we're working with. So we looked at we looked at that scenario and decided, those are pretty draconian. It's going to change the very nature and culture of the civic organization as part of the fabric of the community. And really in earnest started looking at whether or not there might be a different business model by which we could provide services within this community without making those kinds of cuts, without shutting off the street lights or closing the parks, without closing the youth center, without closing the senior center. Most of your management staff here is seasoned. We've been around the state. We've been working in the profession for a number of years, and we've worked under different business models. And we're familiar with cities that are contract cities that have a contract model for the provision of police, for fire. Obviously, the outsourcing the contracts for parks maintenance, which we've already enacted this evening. But we're aware of the model and we're aware of the efficiencies of the model to the point that we believed and represented to the council, actually back in December, something that we should be looking at in March with this budget, suggestions that we could realize the kinds of savings reflected in this chart, perhaps $2 to $3.5 million for police, $1 to $2 million for fire, $300,000 to $600,000 for parks, and like I said, we've already realized the latter. And the council suggested that we take a further look into those contract options. Part of the reason that we, as we investigated this more and more, that we got more and more comfortable, is we looked at costs that other cities have borne with police departments via the contract model and the in-house police department model. This is an actual page out of a Ralph Anderson Associates study that was done for the city of Yorba Linda late last year. And it says, it's too small perhaps to read there, but several general conclusions jump out from the data in this chart. First, the cities which contract for law enforcement services pay much less per capita for these services than those cities which have their own police departments. And you'll see from this chart, the lower left, Yorba Linda was looking, and they were actually concerned because they knew that they were paying more per capita than some other contract cities in the neighborhood. Lake Forest, Chino Hills, Diamond Bar, for example, and sure enough, the report concluded that, well, they were indeed paying a little bit more than those other contract cities. But then they looked at others, because one of the things that they were looking at was creating their own in-house department. And they looked at Brea, Cypress, other cities in the area roughly the same size. Actually, Brea is quite a bit smaller. But and found that the contract model was actually much more cost-effective on a per capita basis there than the in-house departments. We thought, well, that's fine. That's Southern California. Maybe it's not true here. And we've indicated many times we run a very frugal operation. And what we're talking about here is not an indictment of our parks maintenance crews or our fire department or our police department. We think we run a very efficient and good operation. And frugal. I mean, you look at the per capita budget for the city of San Carlos for police services compared to neighboring cities, $310 per capita. It's less than your neighboring cities that have in-house departments. We pay less. We think we're efficient. We run a very fine department. But when you look at other cities in the area that have contract departments, that contract, in these cases, primarily with county sheriffs, you find that our $310 per capita does not look quite so favorable. Cupertino, Saratoga, Danville, Windsor, Rancho Cordova, all pay substantially less than we do on a per capita basis for police services. They are all contract services. So the same thing that we found in Southern California seems to be true in Northern California for cities our size. The contract model is, on a per capita basis, certainly is more cost effective. A few weeks ago, there were some flyers being distributed throughout San Carlos suggesting, well, this transition doesn't always work, that we ought to call the city of Sonoma. As a city that had a department went to a sheriff's department, so we did that. Sonoma contracted for police services in 2004. They entered into a 5-year contract. I called the city manager at Sonoma. She wrote me back and said, and I called her because, I had understood that there was some movement in our community. The flyer Some other comments, there was an editorial in one of the papers suggesting that there were some issues with the Sonoma contract, and I talked with or sent an email actually, voicemails with Linda Kelly, and she wrote me back to suggest that to your questions about there being some rumors about controversy or a mistake in contracting with the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department, this could not be further from the truth. In my 2.5 years here, I have not heard these accusations from any corner of the community. On contrary, the benefits have been far-reaching. And then she left me a litany of reasons why contracting has been good for Sonoma. But perhaps the most telling issue with respect to verification of that comment from the city manager is that the city of Sonoma unanimously renewed its contract, unanimously renewed their contract with the county, not for 3 years, not for 5 years, but for a 10-year contract period just last year. I put in your packet some newspaper articles and a mid-year analysis that was done, a midterm analysis that was done in the city of Sonoma with respect to this new contract option, so that you've got additional background information on that particular concept within your packet. I should indicate that there's well beyond cost. I mean, in talking with Sonoma and talking with some of the other cities that we've talked about or talked with regarding this concept, they actually make strong testimonial arguments about why this is a better service model for cities of that size. It goes beyond cost. Cost I don't think is something that we debate a whole lot given the data, but they talk about access to specialized services. If you have an incident in your town, you may not have a specialized person who actually knows how to investigate that particular type of incident, whereas in a larger organization, you've got more specialists on board that can address specific issues that might come up, specific incidents that might happen in your community. There's better communication. Crimes don't recognize, or criminals don't necessarily recognize the boundary of one city vis-a-vis another. They may not even know when they're going across boundaries from Redwood City or San Carlos. But if the larger organization are in briefings every day talking about the issues, they know across boundaries whether those incidents are a problem or not, or an issue for a region. You're able to contract for tailored services to your particular community, and you're more flexible and nimble, so that if your community changes or if new issues come up in your community, that you can tailor the organization or tailor the contract to meet your particular needs at any given time, and you can do it much more quickly than trying to change the culture or the organizational structure of a department as a whole. And I think it's important, we've talked a lot about the cost. I don't know that we've talked enough about the benefits of the service model. And I think that's something that if you decide to pursue this further, that perhaps over the next couple of months we should focus on more. In terms of the status as to where we are, December of last year we got authorization from the council to begin having conversations with our neighbors. I talked with the neighboring city managers and with the county sheriff. We talked about regional shared joint powers agreement types of entities as well as contract models, and the contract model is the model that had the most legs in terms of those particular conversations, and again I can talk to the specifics and details on that if you wish. The bottom line is that we received 2 proposals for services on a contractual basis, one from the city of Redwood City and one from the county sheriff. Staff hired a firm called Commonwealth International to review the proposals that were submitted. And we have it on tonight for you to give us some direction, as I talked about earlier. We invited both the city of Redwood City and the county sheriff to talk with us. They've made those presentations. I'm happy to report that in your packet, and actually we gave you a small updated version of it that provides a bit more background on Mr. Rogner and Commonwealth International, a few other minor changes on the dais this evening. But we're at a point now where we're happy to say that we've looked at it at the staff level. Mr. Rogner from Commonwealth International has looked at it. We thought it would be good as the next step in this process for you to hear from Mr. Rogner, who has 35 years of law enforcement, much of it dealing with contract models and contract situations. We thought it would be good for the city council to hear from him directly with respect to what he's found. We've looked or asked him to look at our current business model, our current operations. He's talked with many of our current officers as well as the command staff and looked at our staffing levels, looked at our budget situation. In addition to that, he's looked at the proposals. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Ed Rodner from Commonwealth International, and he can present his report and any additional questions at that point that you would have for either him or I, we would be happy to address. Mr. Rodner?
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Welcome, Mr. Rodner. Thank you.
I'm not going to stand up here and reiterate everything that the city manager's told you or what you're aware of in your city, but it's obvious looking at it from the outside in an objective manner. You've slowly been dismantling your police department for almost 10 years now, and you've got them down to the point where you've taken an excellent organization and you're reducing them to a calls for service agency. And if this trend continues, it's going to start to impact the community if you make further cuts. Your agency's ability to hire and retain are going to go up. Individuals that you do manage to hire, since you're offering less than all your surrounding agencies, as soon as they get trained, they're going to move on to better opportunities, and then you're going to repeat the hiring and training cycle and all of those costs. So you're pretty much in a difficult situation. Now, I realize that contracting up here in this part of the state, although it's starting to grow, isn't near as prevalent as what we do down in Southern California. In LA County, nearly half of the cities are contract cities. And they're adding 2 more July 1st, and they're doing a study on one of the larger cities in the county, Pomona. They just turned in the study on that one last week. So it's building in that ability of our legislature to handle the state's revenues, local governments in a serious situation, and regionalization of some form is probably what's going to be the local governments of the future, whether it's just police and fire or other services. The 2 studies that you have, they're both preliminary studies. They're not anywhere near finalized form, but both agencies spent some time thinking them out, and I think their proposed staffing levels are very similar and probably doable for you. There are a few differences. The Sheriff's Department has relief built in, which means that no matter what happens, you've got your 3 cars in the city all the time. The Redwood City, with their 10-hour days, that's a little less of an efficient system. It's a little bit misleading where they talk about overlap between 2 shifts. You've got one shift getting off, you have another shift coming on, so that entire time you really don't have all of those extra officers out there. It's not quite as good as it looks on paper. And there's times that the Redwood City proposal cuts you down to just 2 cars in the city, and I would say that's less than community safe level than what you need. The big difference from a human standpoint is the fact that the sheriff's going to hire all your employees, and Redwood City, which appears to be close in the same financial condition that you guys are in, even if they hire them, I don't think it's going to be for very long. So, have you got questions for me, or do you want me to just
go ahead and finish up, and then we'll open up questions, I guess, for both you and Mark, maybe at the same time.
Okay. Well, Mark's pretty much covered the basics, and like I said, you guys have been dealing with this financial situation for some time at your city. You're well aware of it. Sheriff's Department does have some distinct advantages in the fact that he's your sheriff. You elect him. So even though you're changing police agencies, in a way it is still your police agency, and the sheriff has a vested interest in meeting your community needs. In 4 years, he's going to run for office again. So you have some control and some influence with that agency that you don't necessarily have with another city police department. From what I've seen over the last 15 years, most of the cities that combine their police departments on a small scale, I'm saying, just 2 cities, they wind up having more problems down the line, and most of the ones that have started in the last 15 years have been dissolved. Down in LA County, there were 3 cities that had formed a joint police department, and the Sheriff's Department is going to be policing 2 of them effective July 1st, and the 3rd one probably not too far in the future. But the JPIAs, for some reason, maybe because they're in their infancy and haven't worked out all of the bugs and the long-term issues weren't forethought of, but they tend not to function over time, just like you're having some issues with your current fire JPIA. That where with the contracting situation with the sheriff's departments, that's been going on for 56 years in this state. In the 60s, the state got involved in it, passed a government code section that limits what sheriffs can charge cities, and it gives the city some protection, avoids spiking situations, and it keeps the county from attempting to balance budget issues on the backs of contracts. With city-to-city contracts, there is no government protection of any kind, and it's basically whatever the market will bear. Usually one city winds up somehow in some way supporting the other city, and once that starts, that's when the relationship usually deteriorates.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much. Maybe, so just to let everybody know again, let's take questions from council, those for Mr. Weiss, Mr. Wagner, and then we'll open it up to the public. We'd like to hear your comments or questions that you have. So with that, any questions from council?
Yeah, I'd like to start.
Fine.
A couple from Mr. Wagner before I get to Mr. Weiss. Mr. Wagner, can you speak to me about the difference between an unincorporated area and contract? There's been a lot of talk about 2 areas, North Fair Oaks and Emerald Hills. They're not contracts. They are unincorporated, and there's been a discussion about how they don't have can you speak to the differences between those?
Our state has it set up so that areas that have not incorporated, even though they may be fairly decent-sized communities, the sheriff has criminal jurisdiction and the highway patrol has traffic jurisdiction. And so you've got the unincorporated communities, you've got a divided jurisdiction situation, and it usually results in less than the best traffic enforcement than what a city would get. But you've got some major communities up here, like over on the other side of the bay, Castro Valley is an unincorporated community that's fairly large, probably as large as your city, if not a little bigger. And so they've got Alameda County policing them and the Highway Patrol responsible for traffic.
But when you go to contract, those rules cease to exist. It would just, the contract model is they cover everything.
There's no reason for the unincorporated areas to contract because the state constitution mandates that the sheriff is their police agency and the county is responsible for them. When you become a city, you assume your municipal responsibilities for law enforcement, including traffic. So you either at that point create your own police department or you contract with another agency to provide those police services. It's in the report that literally every city that has incorporated in the last 50 years in this state is a contract city. The capital outlay to create municipal services is just overwhelming, and we wouldn't have any new cities if they had to create police departments, fire departments, and public works from scratch. It'd be too expensive.
Okay. In another part of your report, you talk about how you spoke to some of the employees. Can you give me a rough estimate about how many employees you spoke to?
Before I wrote the report, I had spoke to 12 of them, and then I've had 2 call me since I wrote the report.
Okay, and of those 12, you said 2 were against the contracting?
Correct.
And you mentioned that the arguments against were more emotional than factually based. Can you give me some of the...
Well, comments like the police department should be fully funded and we just have to cut other city services because the police is the most important function in the city, which, if your parks aren't safe, there's not much point in having them. But at the same token, some people that aren't dealing with the financial situation on the global level that you are don't realize that there's still a balance there, and you just can't totally stop something else to create something, especially when there's an alternative out there to maintain another service.
Okay. You also wrote a lot about community character, and you wrote about how the community is reflected in the police department, not vice versa. And you talked about Malibu versus Linwood. Could you speak to a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, well, to give an example, Linwood is a community in south central Los Angeles, and the crime rate is fairly significant. And the deputies that police that community actually do the job in a totally different manner than in Malibu, which has been a contract city since it incorporated, and is a very affluent community, much like yours. And the crime rate is much different, and the community issues are different. The police department deals more with quality of life issues there rather than significant felony crime. And, you know, deputies in both those cities work for the same agency, but they do their jobs very differently. When most people from other agencies in other states come to visit us, they tell us, you know, we've got 22 different police departments that we police our cities out of. No two station even functions the same. The nature of the community requires them to be different. And over time, a police department reflects the norms of the community.
Okay, and just two last questions. In regards to staffing levels, you talked about in Redwood City and the sheriff's proposal. In Redwood City, if someone was to get arrested and taken to the jail, in that proposal we would lose that patrol car until it returned, correct? In the sheriff's proposal, we would get another patrol car to fill that void.
They said that they would guarantee you 3 cars at all times.
Okay, and then with our current police department, we don't get another car to fill that void.
No, you don't.
So in only one of the models is it guaranteed.
The real aspect of that, it comes in when they've got you down to 2 cars in the field. And so, and if arrest is made at night and that car leaves, you've only got 1 car left in the city until that car returns. So that's why I was referring to the fact that I think 2 cars is less than a safe level for your community. I wouldn't drop it below 3 cars. Now, the other aspect of that you have to deal with is when somebody calls in sick, somebody's on vacation, they're on maternity leave, they're at training, they've been injured on the job. When you've got those kinds of absences, there isn't sufficient overtime built into the Redwood City model to allow for all of those absences to be filled. There's going to be times where you're going to have less cars than what they said. The sheriff's proposal did put in enough overtime and specified it as relief overtime so that when somebody calls in sick, somebody's on vacation, you still have your 3 cars in the field.
Okay, and then my final question is, you talked about the government code that limits what the sheriff can charge.
Correct.
Wouldn't that essentially also limit the fact that the sheriff cannot put a cap on what he will charge?
That's true also.
So we just get charged fair, but for him to say, you know, it's going to be limited to like a 5% increase, or that's not factual. It's limited to whatever he's fairly charging us.
Correct.
Okay. Those are all my questions, Mr. Mayor.
Other questions? Who wants to go next? Mr. Kirkcott? Mr. Mon?
Sure.
Thanks.
One of the terms you used was that the department has become a calls for service agency. Could you describe that and what that means for the community?
In today's world, the most innovative departments deal with crime investigation, or they have a fairly significant crime analysis aspect to the field work. And in today's world, those crime analysis activities can be used to direct the patrol units when they've got free time. And in addition to that, you'll find many cities today and many contract areas, there'll be a segment of officers that are dedicated to issues going on in the community. Your black and white patrol cars out there are basically, except when they're not busy, they're chasing the radio. Call comes in for service, the car goes. If the call comes in, especially if it's an emergency call, no matter what he's doing, he has to drop what he's doing and handle that emergency. It's very favorable for communities if you can have a few officers that aren't chasing that radio. They don't have to drop what they're doing and answer calls for service. You got the black and whites out there doing it. Your response times are respectable. You have some directed patrol. Sometimes it's called community policing. But it's a group of officers that are free to address whatever the pressing need in the community is at that time. And it'll change from time to time. You may have a burglary ring operating. You may have some vehicles being broken into or stolen. It can be a vandalism issue. It can be far-reaching. It can be issues with the kids in the high school. But your agency, you've gotten rid of your school programs. You're depleting your detective bureau. You're getting down to where, and if you continue making cuts as you have been, you're getting very close to where all you're going to have is enough cars out there to simply go from call to call and deals with a call for the service without having any free time or any additional resources to address any issues that start to come up in the community. When you reach that point, that's when your crime rate starts to go up and your response times start to increase.
So you also mentioned in your report any further reductions to patrol staff would start to impact public safety, which I get, and I think everybody on council will ascertain that we understand that. But the proposals that we're seeing, and this is something I'd like you to clarify, I mean, on one side, I'm looking at staff comparisons, 32 sworn positions, but the sheriff says 19. So there's a reduction in staff, so how do I do this? Where am I getting confused here?
That is a little misleading with the 19 on the sheriff's department, because since they've built in the relief factor, that relief factor for each of those teams, you combine that up, you're looking at about an extra, what it would amount to an extra 4.5 to 5 full-time positions. And that's the difference between your current police department and the Redwood City. And it goes back to, like I said, when somebody's on vacation, somebody's on maternity leave, somebody calls in sick, that person's not there unless overtime is spent to put it in there. That service level that made the sheriff's proposal a little different that they gave you is they're guaranteeing that, and they've built that cost factor into the cost. It's already there, so that they can keep 3 cars out there and they don't have to drop down to 2 if somebody calls in sick or is on vacation.
Just a few more questions. One of the things that I wanted to understand, you've put sort of a proposal process here for us, and you've described what we have received as a phase 1 proposal, and your recommendation, if you will, or your direction would be that we enter a phase 2, which is a contract process. And that is where a number of the questions you've put up regarding, what can you describe? What are you hoping will come out of the phase 2 discussions?
Both of these proposals, I think, need a little fine-tuning as far as getting a little more specific on the service levels, spelling out relief a little better for you in writing, discussing that the costing needs to be fine-tuned on both of them. I think when you're all finished, you're looking in the vicinity of $6.5 million for either agency. When it's all said and done, they're pretty much going to be this similar amount, and I don't think you can adequately police your city for less than that. And then there's a lot of unanswered questions of what happens to your employees, how will the transfer occur, will they get any credit for time on the books, can any of that be transferred, seniority, rank. All of those are negotiable issues that you need answers on before you actually sign on a dotted line on a contract. And generally, the agency I work for, we just gave our what we would classify as a phase 1 proposal to the city of Pomona, which is considerably larger than you guys are. But it gave you got a proposal that has a very close dollar figure to what the final one will be, and it gave you an idea of what level of service they can give you for that money. But the fine-tuning specifics have yet to be negotiated. And so the next step would basically be to, if you choose to go down that route, to pick an agency and fine-tune those and get it to the bottom line, absolute specific numbers and issues so that you can make a final decision, yes, contract, or no, this isn't going to work for us.
Right, last point, let me quote from your report and then lead to a question. On page 8, you say, when a city considers merging their police department into another agency, there is always a small minority of individuals that predict the end of the city as it's currently known. Comments like, the city will lose its identity, there will be a loss of local control, deputies will not care about our community as our local officers, deputies will not enforce local traffic laws, etc. We've spent a lot of time on this dais talking about local control, what our officers mean, the fact that they're on Laurel Street, etc. And you're talking about local control. Now, the one point that you bring up to local control is on page 10, item 6, when you're saying a management representative from the contracting agency whose primary duty is to oversee the services delivered to the city is the most significant factor. That's great. If we decide to pursue this, it strikes us that we'd better have that. But these are real concerns. And just having a single person saying, well, I've got Bob here who is going to manage this contract, is that really going to address these issues?
It does, and if you look, contracting, like I said, is much more prevalent in the South than up here. And if you look at the numbers of cities that have contracts down there, and you can talk to the people in the community, you can talk to the city councils, the city manager on any of those cities, and they will tell you that they consider the contracting agency their police department. And you'll see that it, even as in one agency such as ours, with the 40 cities that we police, they're policed very differently. Their demographics are different, their community issues are different, and they're policed very differently. But in order to bring that about, when you just have the deputies or officers out there in radio cars, they've got to have some direction from that local community. And when you've got a management person that has the authority to give them that direction and they know to follow them, who can more or less function as a chief of police and take direction from the city manager, who gets direction from the council and the community, you maintain that local control, even though it's a separate agency. Deputies, like anybody else, when they transfer into a community to work at that location, it's usually because they like the location or it's convenient to where they live. They've got some reason for going there, and they generally tend to stay there just as much as officers if you have your own police department. The turnover is not that much different. We've charted it over time and kept track of it because it's an issue with cities. I think the local control issue is a myth as long as you have some safeguards to make sure that the troops are getting the direction that they need to know what the city wants and can start them off in the right direction. And down there, it's, like I said, we've got 40 cities, it's not a problem.
Thank you.
Mr. Burkott, questions?
So I hear what you're saying, and I have a list here of things when it comes to local control. And I'm going to run through the list first, okay? So this is where I see where your community leaders, your council, can have concern about policies, right, that your police department are then carrying out. Traffic enforcement, use of a motorcycle or not, graffiti abatement, youth intervention, community service officers, gang enforcement, community visibility at community events, use of overtime. So those are just some things that I thought of just sitting here as I was listening to you and the city manager, which are areas where the council has input into the police. There are other things if I had enough time to think about it. But the city manager talked about a 10-year contract with a county in Sonoma County. How how do you have control over these things? Now, you talked about, well, if you've got a guy who's, say, a captain, and he speaks to the troops, and you need that in there. That versus what's in a contract or isn't in a contract, the sheriff's department coming back to you and saying, what, you want this now because this problem has popped up? For instance, let's look at traffic enforcement and the use of a motorcycle cop. That's something currently we can look at and say, you know, we're having trouble with around the schools, and so we need a motorcycle. We'd like to have a motorcycle cop or at least some kind of traffic enforcement at Arundel School in the morning or at Carmel High School. We can do that now. Community comes to us and says something about that. We can talk to the city manager. He talks to the chief. Gets done. I don't see how we can do that when we're under a contract and you know, the sheriff says, well, let me look at your contract. Motorcycle cop? It's not in there.
Both proposals have a motorcycle cop in them. Redwood City and the sheriff's proposal had a motor cop in them.
Okay, but that's fine. But my point is, things come up. You're in a contract of some length. Things come up in the community that become issues. Let's not talk about motorcycle cops since that's in there. Let's talk about something else that's not in there.
Whatever's in there, you're buying a police force. Whether it's Redwood City, whether it's Sheriff's Department, you're buying a police force. If they've got a manager overseeing their daily activities and he's answering to your city manager, you're paying for him, you're paying for that police force. If they need to be redirected, such as the motorcycle officer, if they tell him, we want you in front of the grade schools when school starts that first week to make sure people get the message that school's back in session and you need to slow down, that happens. We do it for our cities. You know, if some form of regionalization is probably going to occur, whether it's cities joining police departments, if the sheriff's taken over, but the current fiscal situation is going to be forcing, I think, a change to the way local governments do business here in the future. If the sheriff wants to be that regional law enforcement agency in this county, he's got to take care of the cities. If he wants to get reelected, he's got to take care of the cities. He wants your citizens to be satisfied with the police service as much as you do, because like you, he's an elected official voted on by the same people that vote you into office. He has a vested interest in doing that. Can he not do it? Yeah, it can still fall apart. I mean, you know, humans are humans, and not everybody does everything the best possible way. A few years ago, Sacramento County, Citrus Heights, and Elk Grove both formed their own police departments because the sheriff at the time was not responsive to their needs. And he's no longer the sheriff up there. The chief that they had overseeing their contract city program retired shortly thereafter, and I'm sure the new current sheriff would like to go back and have things as they were prior to those cities creating their own police departments. But the sheriff pushed those two cities into a position. I dealt with Citrus Heights when that was going on, and I recommended that they start their own police department because the sheriff was not being responsive to them at all. They had a situation where they did not have local management like I'm suggesting here. Over the last 15 years, any issues that we've had that came up in any of the cities we contracted with, generally it was a city that didn't have any kind of local management, and we've had a few smaller cities where the sheriff has just put a supervisor in there, even though the city didn't pay for it, just to get the troops aligned and doing what the city wanted. I mean, in our own state, it depends a lot on the attitude and the direction that the sheriff's going to give his troops, if it's going to work. A 10-year contract at one time that's an awful long contract. Our county code limits ours to 5 years, but we've had many cities that have been dealing with us since 1954. The first city that we had, Lakewood, is still a contract city, and they have no indications of ever changing. Cerritos down there, which is a fairly affluent community, before this last recession, they had $250 million sitting in the bank in their reserve account. They built a brand new police station for us to police their city out of, because they didn't want the deputies leaving out of a neighboring city that was like, the station was 2 miles from their city border, but they preferred to have them stay in their city, and they had that money. They chose to continue to contract with the sheriff because they were the police department that the community knew and liked, and the sheriff did what the community wanted. They have local control. They could create their own police department anytime they wanted to, and they've got the cash to do it. They choose to use that money on other things, and they're getting great service. You also have the aspect of when you start to regionalize, you've got significant crimes such as homicides. You know, if you have one in this city once a year, once every 2 years, the detective here may or may not really have the skills to deal with that crime. When you're dealing with a more regionalized type situation, you know, you've got a detective that all he's doing is investigating homicide after homicide. Hopefully, his solve rate will be higher than in a situation where the guy doesn't do that all the time. So there's indirect advantages to wind up being tied into a larger agency.
The second area that I have some concerns about is how, and it relates to the first one, but performance standards. Seems like there ought to be a way to put that into a contract, but I'd be miffed to come up with it. Do you do that?
In an indirect way, yes. And it depends on what kind of performance standard you're talking about. If you're talking about the service received for the cost paid, there's very specific performance standards in there so that the city knows that they are in fact getting what they're paying for. As far as dealing with crime issues, that's kind of a subjective situation that's hard to put down on paper. And again, it comes back to, we've got one city that they hadn't changed their contract in about 10 years. The population went from 80,000 to about 150,000, and with the same size police force, their crime rate was starting to go up. And the city agreed to buy additional law enforcement. They made some other changes. They brought in a crime analysis, and the city manager told the captain that he wanted a 20% drop in crime in a year, or he was going to ask to have him replaced. And fortunately, crime went down 32%, so it wasn't a big problem. And the individual, as they were referring to the captain almost as a rock star in that city, because there was no way the city wanted the sheriff to move him after that. Once he had the resources, he was able to comply.
The last item that I have written down here is labor negotiations. And one of the things that I'm concerned about with contracting is that Mr. Klein hit on it a little bit about this 5%, and I think you said that that figure could not necessarily be guaranteed because the sheriff goes to his union group and manages it or negotiates a contract. And depending on what happens there, that would have an impact on us. Absolutely. As a council, we just sit by and watch and get out our checkbook at the end and write whatever check we need to write, or begin looking at another contract with another source.
In that regard, you're absolutely correct. You have no say over what the county does, and salary increases are passed on to you. That occurs. But with that said, everybody's in the same economic boat. And if the sheriff's department decides to give a raise to the officers working here, that same raise goes to the guys working the courts, the jails, the other patrol, the unincorporated area. So the county, first of all, has to have the money to give some kind of a salary increase. And pretty much salaries tend to fall in line across the community board. You know, in a certain geographic area, either nobody's getting pay raises, or everybody's getting small ones, or everybody's getting big ones. It tends not to be lopsided, and the county's not in any really better financial condition than you guys are as far as salaries and benefits. And I don't think anybody in government's going to be getting any pay raises for several years to come at any level. And I think that's a pretty safe bet to make at this point. But you are right, you have no control over their salaries.
Mr. Pacelli?
I just, most of my colleagues, or all my colleagues rather, have asked a lot of the detailed questions. And to sort of piggyback on what Mr. Ahmad's point was earlier relative to if this is such a great deal economically and still covers our service areas, as you mentioned, in the southern part of the state, apparently it's way more prevalent than it is here. What do you think the first, say, 2 items, there might be more, or maybe there's 3, in 25 words or less, why don't all cities look at this more?
Historical status quo, so to speak. They've got their own agencies, and until some type of a crisis comes up, nobody looks to make a change. Whether somehow the police department gets involved in some kind of a scandal, whether there becomes a major rift between a POA and a city council, and economic situations such as the one this city is currently in, those are generally the 3 reasons that facilitate a change. You know, you've either got a department that winds up in some kind of a major scandal where the feds are coming in, you've got an economic situation, or the council and the POA get so far divided and so much animosity is created that...
So really what it is, not to interrupt you, but just basically, status quo is status quo. Things are going okay, we can afford to pay for it, it appears, so nobody wants to change.
As you know, if it ain't broken, people won't fix it.
Because honestly, like you mentioned, the mayor of Redwood City stood right where you were and said he felt his city was 2 to 3 years away from a possible similar situation. And I can't believe there's not a city council in this state that hasn't looked around. Even some of the ones in our county who have money in the bank to burn can't look ahead and see what's going to happen on this. I guess it's just human nature that, like you said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Like I said, I've been doing this for 15 years, dealing with contract situations specifically all over the United States. And you're going to see some major changes in, and this state is probably the worst because of the 3850 and the huge benefit packages that were awarded by a lot of agencies over the last few years.
Thank you, Mr. Roger. I appreciate it.
Yeah, just again, some good questions already. A couple of council members already talked about performance measures, how to locally manage. A couple things on my mind is the transition period, and why I bring that up, it impacts our people. I know talking to officers and so forth, they're sitting on pins and needles wondering whether or not they're going to have a job or not. We've gotten input from some local people that say, you know, why hurry? Let's take a year or 2 and make a good choice here. What is, how do you see a transition plan, timing, and maybe what the key critical success factors of making this happen?
Well, a couple of the officers on the agency that I talked to have said that, of course, everybody in your police agency has animosity right now because you've publicly gone down this road so far that the anxiety level is rising because they don't know what's going to happen next. But you've got the elements in the police department that are adamant about not having a change. You've got the elements in the police department that are saying, well, it may not be such a bad deal if they went with the sheriff, at least we still have jobs, may even get a salary increase out of the deal. And so you've got, one of your employees stated, the beginnings of a civil war where, you know, Lee and Grant on opposite sides for and against this merger, and the poor chief is Abraham Lincoln trying to keep it all together while the animosity is going on. You'll also start to divide the community itself. They'll start to pick sides, and the whole community can get torn apart if you sit on this for a year. I would say either decide to keep your police department and try to figure out how to fund it to keep it going, or make a decision to proceed down the contract path, but do one or the other. It's hard to imagine, but put yourselves in their shoes of, should I keep coming to work? Should I look for another job? Am I going to get laid off? To deal with that over time puts a great deal of stress on your officers and their whole families. And that's probably the most difficult aspect of this is them not knowing what their future is.
Okay. And the last question, again, relates to performance, making sure we measure that we're successful, and if we're not, we're able to adjust. Mr. Weiss talked about the Sonoma example, where they just renewed for 10 years, and I was quite interested to read some of the detail of the report that said here 93% of the people here were either satisfied or very satisfied with police services. 97% felt that crime prevention programs are effective or very effective. So high level of satisfaction. Is that the city or the sheriff that's performing those customer surveys?
For Sonoma, that's what the sheriff's doing in that city. He's been in that city for, I think, 4 or 5 years already.
Okay.
Before the 10-year contract came up. My agency, we've been policing cities since the middle 50s that still contract with us. In 1954, we had 1 city. In 55, we had 3. And by 57, we had 27 cities down there. Mm-hmm. So it exploded rather rapidly. And today we've got 42. And there are some cities in our county that, due to their economic situation and their status quo, they're never going to contract with us. Beverly Hills will always have its own police department. And they've got a phenomenal budget that I would love to have. We've got a city down there, it's called Arcadia. They have the Santa Anita racetrack, and they have a huge shopping mall in their city that a lot of the neighboring city population come to. Those 2 factors alone maintain that city's budget. I mean, the city gets a quarter for everybody that walks onto that racetrack property, whether it's a horse racing event or some other event. And then they get a cut of the betting that goes on during
So you're saying a racetrack's a good idea, huh? Can we bring that up?
Their city's not much bigger than yours, and their police budget exceeds your overall budget by quite a bit.
We actually had a wooden racetrack years ago. It burnt in a fire on July 4th.
But now unfortunately in California, cities do not have any consistent, stable source of income.
Yeah.
You're at the mercy of the state. You get a piece of the sales tax, and what you get of property tax and everything, the state fluctuates that greatly. And unfortunately, our inept legislature balances their budget on county and local government's backs. And until that changes, this situation is not going to change. Mm-hmm. And I think you guys are at the front of a tidal wave that's going to occur very quickly here, and you're going to either have cities joining together to have multi-city police agencies, or they're going to go with their local sheriff's department. But the small bedroom communities do not have the income to maintain a viable police department in today's environment. It's not there.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, thank you very much. If there's no other questions from council, I'd like to open it up to the public. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, public comment. Again, we encourage you to speak on this item. I have a handful of speaker cards. If you haven't filled out one of these speaker cards, they're in the back. Bring them up to our city clerk. I'll read a few names at a time. We have Eric Daniel, Bob Black, and Sharon McLeod. I'm sorry, Sharon. In that order, come on up.
Good evening. I'm Eric Daniel. I've lived here in San Carlos for 33 years. I moved my business here in 1996. And what I do for a living is do contracting for public agencies. I pity the position you guys are in. We voted for you, and it's really hard to do your job with less money coming in. I vote affirmatively for every opportunity to increase taxes because I consider it a privilege to live in this city. So I've looked at what you're dealing with here, and I only have 2 minutes, so just let me spit out my thoughts. First of all, great report, but it appeared to be very highly biased towards outsourcing, and I see that your business item is actually to consider authorizing the city manager to negotiate a contract with a single agency. And I've heard arguments about the per capita cost going down and things. But I'm looking at these 3 proposals here, and specifically the staffing comparisons that are presented here. And if you want to do a head count on the amount of sworn positions and the amount of money that the city will be paying per position, the city is paying 127.5% to the sheriff's office for the same amount of positions. So 32 sworn positions versus 19. And I am troubled that these 3 proposals are not apples and apples proposals. And I wonder why, if the city would want to contract with the sheriff's office for 19 sworn positions, and they believe that the job can be done with 19 sworn positions, and they're willing to contract perhaps with the city of Redwood City for 21 positions, and they feel 21 positions is a sustainable level, then why is the budget here for St. Carlos based upon 32 positions? And why, instead of getting pardon?
If you could wrap up, summarize.
So I'm just wondering why we're spending money on evaluating outsourcing when we're not spending money on evaluating how we can get the St. Carlos Police Department to do the same job with a lower budget with this many positions, rather than just asking them to cut budget by X amount of percent. And I ask you to consider...
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to move on to our next speaker. I'm sorry. We have a lot of speakers this evening. Okay, Bob Black. Excuse me. Bob Black, your turn, please. Come on up. Bob Black, would you like to speak or not? You'll pass. Thank you. Sharon, please. And after Sharon, we have Ken Castle and Robert Dusky. Thank you.
Mayor Royce, council members, I'm Sharon McAlevey, AFSCME business agent, and I'm before you today to speak on behalf of the non-sworn employees in the police department. A few meetings ago, you heard how they support the work of the sworn staff and help the public. These employees would like to continue to serve the residents of San Carlos. However, should you decide to outsource police services, we ask that you enter into a contract with the sheriff's office and not with Redwood City. The sheriff's office previously committed to holding positions for San Carlos Police Department employees. We ask that you direct staff to work with the sheriff's office to hold vacancies for these employees until such time that a contract can be negotiated and finalized. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Ken? Welcome, Ken.
Good evening, Ken Castle, resident of San Carlos, White Oaks Neighborhood Watch. Gentlemen, I think it's time to take off the rose-colored glasses about the outsourcing, and let's dig down into some numbers and forget about the emotion. A lot has been said about Sonoma and how things have worked out so well there, and the city manager, I believe, has indicated that perhaps an editorial in one of the local newspapers was incorrect in characterizing the problem there. In fact, an item that you have in your own packet mentions that there was an 8% increase to the city of Sonoma from the sheriff's department up there. That compares to our 5.5% or 6% per year increase. So the issue that was being raised by the newspaper was that while the costs may be lower to begin with the first few years, they catch up with you down the line and you have no control over those. So if you want to look at an 8% per year increase in police services, we might be headed down the same road. Secondly, if you compare these two proposals, my reading of them indicates that the sheriff's proposal does not include the cost for the dispatch services, which we currently outsource, which is roughly another $635,000, which would then make the total cost to the city per year more like $7.5 million, bringing down the cost savings to something like $1.3 million. The Redwood City proposal apparently incorporates that cost into its overall operations cost to the city. I think you also have to look at the fact that when you talk about 60% budget being spent on public safety, that tends to be the statewide average from the research that I've done rather than the exception. Oakland is at 85%, which is why they have their problems. One of the things I wanted to look at in terms of this current consultant's report are the things that it omits. There's no mention made about mergers and consolidations with other cities. There's no mention made of the fact that other cities in our county, notably Burlingame, San Mateo, Millbrae, and San Bruno, have consultants just like Mr. Rogner with many years of police experience talking to those cities about how they can make a consolidation work or how they can make a merger work. I think that we need to look at alternatives that include revenue enhancements and not just cuts, and nothing has been said about that this evening. Nothing has been said about parking meters or fees that could be used to offset some of these costs. So I think we need to go look at a little more deeply into these numbers and into the impacts of our city rather than just take these at face value. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Robert Dusky. And after Robert, we have Ron Collins and Carl Dresden.
I'm Bob Dulski, a resident of St. Carlos, Mr. Mayor, Councilman. I'd like to address something a little different as to what we're headed here about this thing. In Mr. Wagner's report, he mentions the fact that we have several times lost the chance to increase the revenue in the city, most recently Measure U. And through our neighborhood watch, speaking with the local neighbors, they're very concerned about the problems that we have and the problems in safety. And every one of them has said to me, we'll pay more money to ensure the safety of our community. And probably, I suspect, that a number of those people are people who voted against Proposition U. I've also heard, although I can't substantiate it, that one of the consultants who predicted that Measure U was going to fail is also now predicting that it could pass. So I would ask you, I know that the city clerk has said, if you act now, but it has to be unanimous amongst the council, you can get a measure on the ballot for November to either use the sales tax increase or the utilities tax increase, which we had originally. That would help to alleviate a lot of the problems, because as Mr. Wagner says, this is not an easy process. It's going to take a number of months before you can reach a conclusion, however you reach it. And so I think you ought to have alternatives. And if it passes and we still decide to go on the outsourcing, we've got some money to deal with the fire department and other issues. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Ron Collins. Welcome, Ron.
There's so much I'd like to say, but I'm going to keep it short. My comments tonight are directed not so much at our council, but as they are to those members of our community who I believe need to come to grips with the grim realities now facing us. My wife and I have lived here most of our lives. We voted for Measure U and all the other local tax measures that have failed in recent years. As a self-employed businessman of nearly 30 years and incoming president of the San Carlos Chamber, I have a keen interest in the financial well-being of this town. As a former member of the Planning Commission, current member of the Economic Development Advisory Commission, I also have a considerable understanding of how a city functions. The first and most important thing a city can do for its citizens is to provide public safety. Everything else comes after that. So our most important concern should be maintaining public safety. We have three options. Keep our police department as is, join with Redwood City, or contract with the sheriff's department. The first two options will result in little or no savings and police layoffs and less public safety. Only the third option keeps all of our officers, maintains public safety, and saves the city money. Anyone who doesn't understand that, hasn't been paying attention, has a different agenda, or is living in an alternate universe. I don't want to talk about the just released report by the independent consultant because Mr. Rogner did a very good job, but I believe everyone should read it. We are living with an outdated, unsustainable model. We need to change that or start thinking of ourselves as the next Vallejo. And no one here has talked about that tonight. Vallejo has gone bankrupt. We're next. We really are that close. Everyone should understand what's at stake here. Stop blaming the council and the city staff and let them do their job. Time is running out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Carl? And then Pat Bell?
She left.
Thank you. I was thinking that perhaps it would be a good idea to form an advisory committee because the council doesn't have time to consider whether the St. Carlos Police Department can provide a similar service level as the Sheriff's Department at a similar price. And it's true, when you do look at the numbers, currently St. Carlos pays approximately $278,000 per officer, I believe it is, and with the Sheriff's plan, you'd be paying $354,000 per officer. So there's something here that doesn't make sense, and I wonder if it's something to do with the fact that Mr. Wagner specializes in the Sheriff's Department being enlarged to take over city police departments. It seems to be everything in his resume is toward that, doing that. That he's helping right now the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department take over the Los Angeles County's Office of Public Safety, and Sheriff of Los Angeles learning to contracting for the El Dorado County Sheriff, Sacramento County Sheriff, the Alameda County Sheriff, the Ventura County Sheriff, the Shasta County Sheriff, the Washington County Sheriff, the Will County Sheriff, Rockland County Sheriff, and Pino County Sheriff, Arizona, San Juan County Sheriff, and he's been 35 years with the Los Angeles County Sheriff, which we appreciate. His years of good service. However, I believe he's a specialist when it comes to the Sheriff Department taking over a police department. So I wonder if that's just, we got one team here doing the reports for you. And so I pray that the council and mayor will consider this matter further and not rush. We need more law enforcement at this time, not less. The trend is toward more crime in all the cities. And this is not the time to reduce the effectiveness of law enforcement, but rather to help it improve and increase. Now, Mrs. Maloney, who was here last time you all met, and some of you seem to know her, from a large law enforcement family, brought up the fact that the sheriff would be responding to crimes rather than concentrating on the level of patrolling currently in existence. And the patrolling does keep crimes from happening, which I think is where we really want to be for the present and the future. Now, one thing in closing I want to say is I never did really hear, because the
start to wrap up, please. Thank you.
This is the closing sentence. Thank you, Mayor. I never really did hear, in response to the report, that Sonoma ended up costing more for police enforcement after outsourcing. I never did hear the evidence that it was costing less.
Okay, thank you. And I believe...
Pat Bell, I don't see her. No, great, thank you. Anybody else? Next speaker, welcome to speak. Come on up. Two speakers, come on up. If you don't have a speaker card, you could fill one out after. Give it to Christine. Thank you.
I just want to start by saying thank you, Mr. Mayor and council, other council members, and actually city staff. I think that this has been a problem. I'm sorry, I identify myself. I'm Marty Miller. I'm a local resident of 20 years, business owner, and father of 3, and family member in the city as well. So a lot of vested interest for public safety. So I want to thank all of you for taking the time to do what you do. This has obviously been pretty tough. This has been a fiscal problem that's been going on for a long, long time, so this should not be news to anyone. And I think that there were some good points earlier, but at the end of the day, we are a city that has to live within our means. We're a city that has, over time, voted down other revenue measures. And due to the current economic conditions, it's pie-in-the-sky thinking to think that our revenue is going to increase significantly over the short run. So I think there's a very difficult decision ahead of you, but I do support the fact of outsourcing. That does seem to be the way to come within our means and maintain levels of service on our streets. I'd also encourage you to go with the sheriff's route. I think that the people in the police department have done a phenomenal job for this community for a long period of time. And while economically it is not possibly as saving as the other proposal, I think we do have a human effort here that we should acknowledge and place as many of those officers as possible. So with that, I would encourage you to outsource and make the difficult decision, but do what's right for our city. The other comment that I would make that I think is sometimes missed, Mr. Grocott mentioned control earlier. That seems to be a buzz on the street. Again, it's fiscal. The example he used was one of a patrol officer on a new motorcycle. Those cost money. If that was something we didn't have with our current police department today, we would have to find the money to put that in place. It is no different with the sheriff's proposal. If something comes up in the future that we don't have today, we've got to pay for it. It's really as simple as that. So our control is going to be with our pocketbook no matter how we slice this pie. And given our pocketbook is in dire shape, I think we keep our levels at least where they're at with the sheriff's proposal and put some of our other programs in place, keep the budget and balance of the city where it should be. So thank you all.
Marty, thank you. Okay, Gil? And anybody else, please get ready if you'd like to speak. Hey, welcome,
Mayor,
Gil.
City Council. Gil Granado, President of the Police Officers Association for San Carlos. I read a bunch of notes, but 90% of the citizens that came up pretty much covered all that information. I would just like to, again, express the fact that the POA is against the outsourcing. We welcome the City Council and the city staff to work with us for other alternatives to outsourcing. And we've talked about them before, partnerships, JPAs. Councilman Grocott has got some great ideas. Some of the citizens have had some great ideas as well. So we welcome that. As we move forward with the meet and confer process, we welcome talking to the city as well. Nobody's asked the POA what we can do for you to make this work. Everybody's talked about what the management's done. Well, it's easy to give away 10 and 15% when you're the top 3 in the county in your position. So the POA is willing to help. Management's starting to take a lead, but show us what we can do and come talk to us. I hope the City Council listens to what's being said by the citizens, and I encourage the citizens to stay involved as we move forward with the ballot measure process. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Gil. Okay, anybody else like to speak? Evening's young. Come on. Okay.
You have one right there.
Okay. Come on up, please. Come on. Sure, welcome. Give us a speaker card after. Randall? Brian?
Gentlemen, study Councilman Grocott's figures, please, before you make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Good. Well, I look for closing the public comment. Mm-hmm. Hear a motion on that?
It's not a public hearing.
Not a public hearing, sorry. Okay. Good. Sorry. Maybe before we move on here, Mr. Rubens, our city attorney, can you just, very important issue, just clarify again specifically what we will be doing here over the next 25, 55 minutes here, please.
Well, just to reiterate what the city manager said earlier, the agenda item tonight is not about the decision to contract. It's rather about giving direction to staff about who or at which entity to negotiate a contract and to authorize a proposal to the Police Officers Association. So it's the decision to contract, if the council decides to go in that direction, would come later after a lot of negotiation, and you wouldn't make that decision until after you actually saw a contract before you. So I wanted to clarify that just for the public and for the council.
Thank you very much. Okay. So with that, comments maybe starting here to my left this time, Mr. Grocott.
I do not care to go forward with what's presented to us, which is to authorize the city manager to negotiate a contract for police services with either Redwood City or the county sheriff's department. I have a number of reasons for why, as has been stated with the Redwood City proposal. It really doesn't save us that much, and it is not good for our employees, and they are not in much of a different position than we are. Regarding the sheriff, there are issues there that I am concerned about. Some of it just has to do with, the leadership of Mr. Monks. Now, this consultant mentioned to us, well, the sheriff gets elected every 4 years, but if you know what's going on in this county, we just had an election. It was uncontested, even though the gentleman in the position has a bit of a history, which I don't care to put my police officers under that kind of leadership. Thank you very much. And as the consultant agreed, when it comes to labor negotiations, we sit by and watch from the sidelines. I have said all along that I think while it's a tougher road to go down, it's a lot more work. I've been down it before. Partnerships, to me, is a better deal. It keeps more of the local control, keeps your council involved, and I think the council ought to be involved. When you do a contract, I guess the council gets involved every 5 years or whatever the duration of the contract is, but in between time, I didn't hear anything in the consultant's answers to my questions about policies that made me feel comfortable. He talked about safeguards for these things, but I didn't hear anything in any sort of concrete terms of how you do that. And that's the thing that concerns me the most. I do think things happen in a community, from year to year, where your law enforcement efforts have to be nimble and have to be willing to change. And if you're locked into a contract that says you have this or that, that's rather difficult. The one gentleman mentioned about the motorcycle officers. We just recently, we have, 3 or 4 bikes, beautiful motorcycles sitting in the garage. And recently we talked about wanting somebody back on there, and our chief put it together using a reserve officer, somebody who had recently retired, I believe, and then came back and is working for us at a pretty economical rate so that we've got somebody on a motorcycle. We can do those kinds of things because we have our own force and our own chief and so forth. And I think if we were in some type of JPA, we could also do those kinds of things. But when you just contract out, as I see it, you lose all of that. So to the question here, my answer is no.
Thank you. Mr. Caselli.
Well, I disagree with my colleague on some of his points. I don't think you can have it both ways. It's very difficult to say that you don't want to outsource or you don't want to do a JPA and you want to keep your own police force, and then on the other hand, not support a tax measure to try to raise some funds so we can balance this budget. I think it's inappropriate and very, very difficult to understand how people can take that position. I'm very frustrated sometimes with government because we're not a private company. In a private company where you have employees and you have a difficult time, many of those employees may be at will, and you just say, we're all going to take a haircut and we're going to make this happen. Government doesn't work that way. There are meet and consent. We have employee groups that are organized. There are many, many more hurdles to jump over. We've looked at revenue enhancements, as was mentioned earlier, in the last few years. Every one of those has failed. The speaker came up today and said, well, it'll work this time. I guess I'm confused because on the last one, which I guess I'm a little frustrated because perhaps I worked too hard on it to try to make it happen, we tried to explain what was going to happen if it didn't pass. We obviously didn't do a very good job because people didn't get it. Now they get it. Terrific. Who's going to step up and say we're going to raise taxes? Somehow that seems to be going against the tide of our country. The only taxes that I see being raised are ones for schools. I don't see any other tax increases being passed on a majority level in this state. And our politicians come up with some of these ideas, and the public says, no thanks. And our city said it last time. We have a $3.5 million deficit. As was mentioned by Mr. Weiss, we can't print it like the federal government. We can't do smoke and mirrors like the state. We have to solve it now. We're elected, the 5 of us are elected to make those decisions. You may not like the decisions we make. You're more than willing to get rid of us. We had an election in November. It was unopposed. Now, you can take that as we're doing a wonderful job, or you can take it as that nobody wants this job. Now, I wanted this job. I ran for this office in 2005, and I ran for it again. I've lived here 27 years. I think sometimes folks forget that we're the same people that sit next to you in restaurants, go to your churches, shop at B&K's, go to the Starbucks to have coffee, and all the rest. We live here. Every decision we make impacts all of us. We're not some folks that, brought in twice a month to buy a bus and put up here. So, believe me, we're trying to do the best we can. Having said that, the decision for delay, I start to think of artificial turf. And when I started in 2005, when I ran, we were talking about artificial turf. It's 5 years later, we're still talking about artificial turf. I'm not equating that to outsourcing the police department, because the police department is 100 times, 1,000 times more important than artificial turf. What I am equating is the process. We have got to make a decision. We don't get extra time. We are presented with a problem, and we have to make the decision. Everyone in this room has the same thing in their own home and in their own business, no matter where they work. They have to make the decision. They don't get to say, well, let's worry about it tomorrow, or let's push it down the road. Maybe the next guys will do it. We have to make the call. It's a tough one. I don't think any of us up here relish this call. But as the gentleman said, Mr. Wagner said, this model is the one, at least in my opinion, that's going to be the future one. As I said before, Jeff Ira, the mayor of Redwood City, stood here and said his city is 2 or 3 years away from the same decision. We're just the first one, folks. And if we don't look at how government is run, we're all going to be sitting here with no government because it isn't going to work. So in this situation, I respectfully disagree with my colleague. I think the outsourcing situation is something we should go and talk to our POA about, and that's what the motion is about tonight. And I think we should talk to them about it and see what we can come with. The sheriff's proposal allows for every single employee to have been offered a job, most with raises. And for this council person, to speaking to the folks from AFSCME, if there's anyone that's going to get a cut in pay, I'm going to hold out, I think it's called a red circle, that those folks get the exact same, minimum, the exact same pay if we go in that direction. I think it's about jobs, and I think it's about keeping our city protected. We have 3 patrol cars. I can't tell you how many people I ask, how many police officers do you think are out on patrol at any one time? And they go, 7, 8, 10, 15, 20. I go, there's 3 patrol cars, maybe 4 on a Saturday night. Folks, that's all we have. We're going to have the same coverage with the proposal that's given to us by the Sheriff's Department. I mean, I'm at a loss, as Mr. Collins said. I just don't know again, perhaps it's the fact that we sit here and we get a lot more information. And the problem I think government has is we don't get the information out to the folks in the community. And I'll take responsibility for that, and I'll take the blame if that's where you want to put it. But we've got to do a better job of letting people know what the facts are, not what the innuendo is or the rumor is, but what the facts are. And those are my comments, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Klein?
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to agree with Councilman Grassilli on a lot of what he said. So to speak to a couple of the public comments and to answer some questions. One of the public comments was, how can we get this done with 19 sworn positions as opposed to 32? And one has to deal with the backbench. We have to have 32 officers because we have to be able to staff those positions at all times, and you need to have a certain amount of people to do that. The sheriff has over 600 deputies. So we're only have to have 19 sworn positions. Someone gets sick, someone gets hurt. He's got people to fill in. But when you're your own department, you can't call your friends up the road and go, hey, lend us a couple guys. That doesn't happen. That's why we have to have a much larger number. One of the other comments was about, why doesn't staff just take a 15% pay cut? And I take exceptional issue to that when the speaker who was giving that signed an initial initiative that would have given staff to end at 20% more in pay. And now you're saying take a 15% pay cut. And there was also a question that asked why don't we ask the POA how they're willing to help? There's been a couple issues that have come up past since 2008. 2008 was the financial meltdown. Prior to that, we were kind of in a drizzle, and now we're in a hurricane of economic hurt. In 2008, the POA president said the San Carlos Police Department will now have a hard time retaining and attracting quality officers. He said he doesn't see why a skilled officer would accept a job in San Carlos when neighboring cities offer better benefits. That's when we went to a second-tier benefit system. That was 2 years ago, and I have a question for you, City Manager. How many police officers have we hired since 2008?
I asked the chief today. He told me 11 people since the beginning of 2008.
So my thinking is if we're to take the POA president seriously on what he said, the question is, those 11 people, you're saying that they're not quality officers. I disagree, but that was the threat that was made at that time. In 2010, in January, I voted against it, but my colleagues differed, and they voted for a 3.5% raise to our POA. The POA vice president said we were going to in for a very costly legal battle over a 3.5% raise. So to say, we haven't asked the POA for help, well, they've kind of shown us that we can't cut their pay anymore, and I agree. They're the lowest paid in the county. It's really hard to ask the lowest paid people in the county to take another hit. So we have to look at different ways to do things. So we come with these two options, well, 3 options. One, we have a police department that's unsustainable. In the past 5 years, we've gotten rid of 7 officers and contracted out dispatch, yet costs have risen 21%. So we show even when we get rid of people, even when we get rid of our dispatch, costs still go up, and 21% is pretty sizable with, a fourth less people. So we have to look at the Redwood City and the sheriff's proposal. With all due respect to Redwood City, I am so thankful that they gave us a proposal. I really believe that they went above and beyond what's expected. I can't go with the proposal because I feel it doesn't give us what we need as a town. We don't have a department, and essentially a department in town. We don't have some of the other options we have. I feel that the numbers are a little less, and there's the fact that we would lose probably about half of our employees. And I think we do have to take that into consideration. We have to always do what's right for the citizens first, but you have to look at how this affects your employees, and we're going to fire 50% of them. That's a huge issue. I know Oakland has just fired 89. San Jose is talking about getting rid of over 100 police officers. I don't want to be that city. I don't want to let these people who have put their life on the line go if we have a chance to find them a job somewhere. And with the sheriff's proposal, everyone has a place to land. Also, with the sheriff's proposal, contracting with the sheriff is a tried and true method. It has worked for 50 years. The JPA model isn't a tried and true method because, well, we're trying it with our fire department. It's not working. I read in the report how when you're in a JPA, eventually one city gets more favorable service than the other. And we're seeing that now. We are paying a lot more than our partner. And I feel that would happen in a JPA for our police department as well. But when you contract out with the sheriff, if we get more money and we want another officer, we have our city manager pick up the phone, he calls the sheriff and goes, hey, we'd like 4-in-1 staffing levels. Pretty quickly, we get a bid. And if we have the money, say it's $1 million, we have an extra $1 million, and we accept it, we get a new officer. But then when it comes to laying off people, it's also different. When the contract comes up, say we don't have enough money for 4-in-1 anymore, we go to 3-in-1. We don't have a union show up, we don't have people come and say you can't lay these people off. It's the sheriff's issue. We go to 3-in-1, we sign our contract, we're done. That's how easy this is. And I believe 8 months ago, if you asked me what version do you believe has more local control, your own police department, contracting out, or a JPA, I easily would have said my own police department 8 months ago. Not a problem. I hadn't sat up here, I hadn't seen everything that I've seen now. Now, if you were to ask me, I truly believe the contracting model gives us the most local control. We have a say over what we want. It's governed by our pocketbook. If we have the money, we get it. If we don't, we can't afford it. We don't have to deal with the issues we have to now. And with respect to Councilman Grocott in saying that he wants to be in labor issues, as a council and I think as a county, we have failed in labor issues. I mean, you see it left and right. We have failed. We've given 3% away at 55 when people are living 30 years past retirement. We have failed. So to say we want in on labor negotiations, I think we need another team to go in and maybe take care of that for us. But I don't think in any way that losing that aspect is going to hamper our city because we take our cues from everywhere. The 3% came from the state level all the way down to the cities. We take our cues. Everyone moves along at the same path. San Carlos has shown we've been at the forefront with labor negotiations. We've tiered. We've asked for money back. We've done all these other things. We have a streamlined city, and still we can't afford it. So I would support tonight going with the sheriff's proposal and looking at getting a harder contract because I believe this is a phase one. I do believe the consultant's report which says that we'll probably see greater savings than what's actually shown. I would just ask that the staff get it done quickly, meet with the POA, take care of our people, but let's get it done and let's move on.
Vice Mayor Ahmad. Mr. Mayor, let me acknowledge fear. Folks are used to a business model that we have. There is one way that we work with our police force. There are local guys. We know them. And there is fear of change. Let me acknowledge that. It is real. I don't want to dismiss it. I don't want to be cavalier with it. It's a legitimate fear. But also in fear is opportunity. There have been a number of people who have said one of the primary responsibilities of the City Council is to ensure public safety. If this proposal that we are going to entertain was going to harm public safety, I would vote against it. But I am reading the reports. I've called up other mayors and said, how's your contract working? How does it work for you? Actually went down to Cupertino, wandered around their city hall, talked to their folks. How is it working for you folks? I think there is an opportunity for San Carlos to do a number of things. Number one, not just maintain safety, but enhance it. The city of Compton, through a number of issues, had to get rid of their police department and went to the sheriff. Times are a little bit different, and they're trying to bring their police department back. They're actually getting a backlash from the citizens, saying, how could you let the sheriff go? Do you know what resources the sheriff is bringing? We're not going to have a helicopter. We're not going to have SWAT teams. We're not going to have drug interdiction. We're not going to have the bunco unit. We're just going to have a police force. These are things we want, and the sheriff brings it to us. So there are arguments on the other side. I think there are opportunities for tremendous resources. I think there are opportunities to make a contract situation work as well as our local force does today. To be clear, the sworn and non-sworn personnel of the San Carlos Police Department have set the bar high. If we decide to move to outsourcing, to a contract situation, the people taking on the contract will have a tough job. They're going to have to meet professionalism, they're going to have to meet the pride, and they are going to have to perform for the citizens of San Carlos at a very high level. I'll just also leave with one different story, that there are issues that we have in San Carlos, and we're looking at other parts of the county, we've looked at other parts of the state, and we wonder what's going to happen to our community. I was meeting with I'll just refer to him as a government official from Colombia, who was describing sitting on a sidewalk cafe as one of the most amazing experiences he had. I'm like, what are you talking about? We're just sitting here having coffee. What's the problem? Because, well, in Bogota, if we were sitting outside, there would be a van that would come out, 3 guys would jump out, we'd be kidnapped. I'm like, that's the capital. And they're like, he goes, yeah, that's the problem. But then he went through how Colombia went through their dealings with trying to deal with cartels. We're not dealing with cartels. We don't have vans coming around kidnapping folks. This is not Mogadishu, and we don't have pirates running around on the San Francisco Bay. We have different needs. We have had very high levels of customer service from our police department. But at this point, the opportunity to, number one, preserve people, which is important. I've said it before, the most important resource of our city goes home at night. Making certain that our people do have a job is important. I think the sheriff does offer that opportunity. The sheriff offers the opportunity for greater resources to police, patrol, and make our community safe. And there is a great opportunity for us to do this in a fiscally responsible and sustainable fashion. To those points, I will support directing the city manager to go to what would be, according to this report, a phase 2 discussion. There are open issues. They do need to be addressed. There's a lot of fine-tuning. I want to see that here before we can really come to hard discussions of a final decision.
So I always, of course, like to look back a little bit. Our city was incorporated about 85 years ago. First 50, 55, 60 years were pretty simple. City staff did everything, from making roads to providing safety, doing it all. And all of a sudden you see the business model changing for all of our cities. And actually we've been successful. And I'd like to spend actually most of my talking about what those business combinations are, because in my work world, I worked with those, with startups. We made investments, and there were shareholders, and those kind of business combinations occurred there. The first business model that actually does work very well for our city and many other cities are our JPA, our Joint Power Authorities. Many of you know that our garbage and our sewage services are basically these partnerships, these JPAs of about 12 cities that all come together with some common goals. They invest based on their size of their usage and so forth, and build sewage plants and provide recycling and garbage and all these things. And of course the key in that partnership, I call it a partnership because it's all these partners all working together to try to provide excellent service at an efficient price. They have their boards and so forth that do a lot of planning, and it actually again works well. And what's the key though is there's no major player. Everybody's like 5%, 7%, 12% if you're a big city. It's a partnership of a lot of people with some common goals, and it works very, very well for our city. And that's something that wasn't there when we started with San Carlos. So we've been successful with that. The second of three partnership examples, and there are others, but three majors, is a 50-50 relationship. That's when you have two partners. That's when no one has a majority, no one has a minority. It's split half and half. And of course, the best example I could always give of that is my marriage. It works. It's a lot of work, but it's probably one of those partnerships that continues to work well. But in business, it is tough. And in fact, the grand jury report that came out a month and a half ago on fire, they had two recommendations, and their comment was on all the fire departments is to have a conflict resolution process. And a good example of that is our Belmont-San Carlos fire, because we have two cities, we have two people on the board, they have two people on the board, everything works well with it, but the decision-making takes forever. Many decisions get stalled because you have one yes, one no, one no, one yes. And you could also relate to having a brother, and you share an investment with him. And he has one idea and you have another idea. You both own the property. What are you going to do? If you have two different opinions, you're stalled. It's a very tough relationship to have what I call a two-partner or a 50-50 relationship. So now we move on to the third kind of what I call business combination. And that is where, and actually it's the way most of corporate America works under the shareholder arrangement, you have a lot of minority interest. You have people that own 1%, 5%, 12%, but there's always usually a majority shareholder. And if you relate it, now I'm getting into the topic that we're speaking at hand, is that we and a lot of citizens talk about city services. Let's merge. When we went to Redwood City, that was kind of the first idea, is to merge with the city of Redwood City. And I'm just using that as an example. But Redwood City is 3 times our size in people. They're actually 4 times our size with the police department, because they get 20% more money, property tax, so they spend 20% more. So they're 4 times our size. If we were to merge with them, we would be a 20% player, a minority interest, what I would call. They would have 80%. And in that type of relationship, even though it's a merger, and that sounds better than the word I'm going to talk about later, outsourcing, in that relationship, that would be a merger, they would have 80% of the power, 80% of the calls, 80% of the decision-making, budget times, 80%. We would be basically a small player in an organization. And, of course, what you need to realize is when we approach them as a merger, very quickly into the process, they came back and realized this 80-20 ratio and said, you know, why don't we just do it for you? Which, to me, makes a lot of sense, because we're going to be a minority 20% player. How are we going to make calls? So think about those business combinations, those multi-JPAs where everybody's a minority, the pros and cons of the 50-50 type of partnership, and then normal business partnerships in which you have majority and minority shares, and how effective that works in business, but also how it can work for a city. And now I'm changing, because the Redwood City model, by them recommending, quote unquote, why don't we just do it for you, changes the concept of merger to outsourcing. But it's very, very similar, except it has one major advantage. When you outsource, you are a customer. What's that mean? In this case, what it means, and again, Redwood City, I'll talk about Sheriff Redwood City a little later in my next comments, but let's stay on the Redwood City model. We choose, as a customer, what services we want. We decide on the level of services. We want platinum, gold, silver. Okay? We actually work with the vendor, and we're paying for it, so we make the calls, just like you as a customer. A customer has tremendous control in that business relationship, because the customer, once you get beyond the term of the contract, can actually walk. There are other vendors that can provide that service. And even in police, I foresee other models out there, even privatization of police services. There will be options other than Redwood City and the Sheriff's Office in years to come to provide all sorts of city services, including our police services. So, my whole summary of everything I've just said up to now is people don't like the word outsourcing. Our business model has changed from the first 55 years of San Carlos. There needs to be mergers. There needs to be JPAs. There needs to be outsourcing. And sometimes the pros and cons of each of those business relationships end up pulling pretty closely together. And actually, again, my own business experience shows that a customer has tremendous amount of pull and advantages in this type of relationship versus being a minority player. And so it is a very strong argument for why I'm proposing to outsource, and use the word outsource, because to me it's a very positive term. Other thoughts, and most of my colleagues have mentioned this, I think this whole all gets down to level of service, it gets down to cost, and it gets down to how we take care of our people. Mr. Ahmad talked about improving service. I think in that customer relationship, and Mr. Grocott raised some questions about, well, what if we have a motorcycle, or what if this happens? As a customer, you have a lot of control on signing up. You pay for what you want. If you want it, you pay for it. And so there's a lot of control there from service. And from all the money that's saved, the point isn't to save money. The point is, especially even during a transition period, is to pump some money back in to make sure you actually enhance your services. And we will find out, this is my own sole prediction, to have better services at a lower cost with this model. So that covers the first two, service and cost, because they're all proven tremendous savings with us, and we know what those savings are. And the last point is people. We can't forget that our police force, and a lot of slides and a lot of presentations we get all year, it's a small force, a lot of local people that work on the force. We win hands down as far as levels of service, the amount of safety that we have in San Carlos. We're very proud of it, and we basically had people come in with a commitment to work long-term in the city of San Carlos. And we can say, hey, things have changed. But I can't say that. I have to say we have to take care of that dedication of those sworn officers and the rest of our staff that came in. And if we have an opportunity to provide them other jobs, and actually many of those jobs that can actually be retained in the city of San Carlos to keep that strength of local knowledge, which is important, and still provide them an opportunity for rotation to work in other jobs, not impact their pay, in fact, probably increase their pay, as we've talked about. I feel very satisfied that we, in this economic climate, can provide employment and long-term employment and health to those dedicated people that have served us for so long. So with that, those are my thoughts.
Mr. Mayor, I move to authorize the city manager to negotiate a contract for police services with the county sheriff and authorize staff to propose contracting for police services to the Police Officers Association.
Second.
Okay, first and second. Any discussion before we vote on this most important issue?
Mr. Mayor, because of one of the comments of one of my other colleagues, I just want to be clear. Everybody knows, I was not in favor of Measure U, and I worked against Measure U. And I'm not saying that, we should just keep going along with the same old model. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that I feel like we've been brought to a point where we've got one choice. It's either do this or do nothing. Because the direction that I would like to have seen us go, which I mentioned in my earlier comments, is looking at regionalization, but through some type of JPA program. And there are cities out there that are looking at that. Millbrae's looking at that, Burlingame's looking at that, etc. So we wouldn't be the only ones. I don't think we really gave it that much effort to look at regionalization in that format. I respect the comments you made. I listened very closely to what you said about the different the pros and cons. But I think you make some good arguments. I still, I look simply at, for instance, our library JPA. It's a very strong JPA. It runs very well. We do garbage the same way. We do sewer the same way. So we're in a number of these things, and they do work. I would agree with what one of the council members down here said, that while it's more risky to look at doing police service that way, maybe it was Mr. Ahmad, and that looking at sheriffs, they've been doing that for, as this gentleman has pointed out, since the 1950s. Well, I would agree. And I agree we're on the cusp of something different where we're going to have to do public safety differently. So the question is, if we're going to do regionalization, how are we going to do it? We're going to do it as a contract to a larger organization, being in this case the sheriffs, or are we going to look as cities to coagulate our efforts and regionalize that way? I prefer the latter as opposed to the former. I've given my reasons, but I just wanted to be clear. I'm not asking that we just sit and spend money and go on the same old way. Everybody understands we can't do that. It's just the approach here that I don't agree with.
Any other discussion? Okay, call a vote.
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Klein?
Yes.
Mayor Royce?
Yes.
Thank you all for coming for this. Okay, let's go back to, maybe we'll just pause here for a minute or two. I know some people may want to leave before we get into consent items that were pushed to the later part of the meeting.
Yeah. You got a couple of things. Okay, I think we've come to officially the part of the meeting that nobody cares about.
Want to
CEO over at the chamber staying because I pulled his.
Okay, so moving on to consent calendar, we have items C, D, G, and H. I'll let the council member who brought those up take us through each of those. So C, I believe was that you, Mr. Grocott?
Yes, and actually, we could, I suppose, take C and D together. I simply pulled them because, as it says, the consent calendar is supposed to be routine items. Never in my 9 years on the council have we authorized to the city manager to continue spending money without a budget. So that to me is not routine, and I simply pulled it so that it would be something everybody's aware of. I know we're aware of it because it's on the agenda, but I think the citizens of San Carlos, the business people in San Carlos deserve to know that we're authorizing, or would be authorizing tonight by the passage of this, to go forward and spend money. There are guardrails in here. I acknowledge that. I'm not concerned about the item. I just wanted to pull it so that it would be something folks would be aware of. That, and it quite frankly has to do with, it's very much related to what we just went through, which is until we have some of these things worked out, it's going to be difficult to actually formulate a budget by July 1.
Move approval items 8, C, and D.
Second. Roll call, I guess. I'm sorry.
One's actually council, one's actually RDA, so.
Can we do yay and A?
We need to separate the motion. We need to separate the motion, excuse me.
I think you should separate them.
Move approval item 8C.
Second.
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Klein?
Yes.
Mayor Roy?
Yes.
Move approval item 8D.
Second.
Roll call?
Director Ahmad?
Yes.
Director Grisilli?
Yes.
Director Grocott?
Yes.
Director Klein?
Yes.
Chair
Yes.
Royce?
Okay, G? Someone, you have H or G?
No,
It's over here too.
Councilman
Okay.
Grocott.
Sorry, just look at that real quick. Oh, and again, I'm sorry, I pulled this just so that there would be awareness. I know there's a particular neighborhood that's concerned about this item, and to pass it on the consent calendar might mean that it would go unnoticed, and so this is just to approve a public hearing date for July 26th to be, I guess it's going to be on the Planning Commission's calendar agenda. And it's regarding the revocation, suspension, extension, transferability, and duration of the conditional use permit for Verizon Wireless, Sprint, Nextel, and T-Mobile. And there's a particular neighborhood in town that's concerned about that hearing, so I just wanted it to be out there.
Okay, hear a motion?
Just for clarification through the Mr. Mayor, that's actually, you're setting a hearing, the Planning Commission's already heard the item, and you're setting a hearing on your agenda.
On our agenda.
As part of our municipal code. It goes up to the city council.
Thanks for the clarification, Mr. Rubens.
Yeah.
Move approval item 8G.
Second.
Roll call?
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Klein?
Yes.
Mayor Roy?
Yes. H.
That was me. Sorry for not making this a point of information, which I found out you can do. Just as city staff, I just wanted Dave hanging around till the end of the meeting. I can see. Well, he's new. He's got to get broken in. Can we take a half-hour break? I just wanted. I attended a public meeting 6 months ago or so, maybe longer, where someone in the public audience stood up and said a way to cut our budget was to stop subsidizing the San Carlos Chamber of Commerce. I just wanted to make sure to clarify that 8H, this is a fee for service. That we're not just giving them money, they are doing things for us.
That's correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure that everyone knew that we don't subsidize the St. Carlos Chamber of Commerce. It's a fee for services rendered.
Yes.
Okay. I move approval of item 8H.
Second.
Mr. Mayor, before that's done, I was intending to pull this as well, and the reason I was going to pull it is questioning if we do on this, do we just routinely pass it? Do we do an RFP on this, or I mean, it's a hefty amount. It's $80-some thousand.
Staff negotiates annually with the Chamber of Commerce for these services. They're uniquely situated in such a way that they can provide these services on our behalf. Certainly, there are some aspects that are parallel to the Chamber's, such as the marketing program and the like, that we've got that we do RFPs for and the like for specialized services, but for the items within this particular contract, we did not do an RFP because of the Chamber's unique situation within the city of San Carlos. And those exceptions are provided for within the municipal code consultant selection services process.
So you don't think anybody else could possibly do this if you put it out to RFP?
Well, I'm not going to say categorically that no one could do what the Chamber does. I mean, you could try to create a new Chamber of Commerce, or you could try to offer the opportunity for a new entity to put a business improvement district together, perhaps, with other business entities. I mean, if you
Well, it's for economic development services, it's not...
That's correct.
So, I guess what's entailed in economic development services that some other firm couldn't do it?
Again, I think that you have a Chamber of Commerce that's uniquely situated here in San Carlos that has members of the business community already participating in that entity. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't develop a new model and try to work with a different entity or a different organization to provide those kinds of services.
Mr. Mayor, I don't know if anybody else on the council sees it, that, the kind of things, I suppose, that would be in economic development services, which, I don't know. It seems to me you could have a professional firm that specializes in economic development that could provide something like that other than the Chamber. Not that the Chamber would go away or not do other things, but specifically as it pertains to aiding the RDA in economic development, I don't see that it has to be the Chamber.
Through the chair, I agree with Councilman Gorkat. I don't think it has to be through the Chamber. I think the fact that it is through the Chamber is a huge bonus to us, because the Chamber it's San Carlos businesses, it's about San Carlos, and if we hire out another company, they could probably do the same job, but I don't think they're going to have the same perspective and the same buy-in that the Chamber offers to us. So I think we're getting a great deal. Maybe if we go with another company, we save a couple $1,000s, but I think we lose a huge amount by doing that. So.
We don't know what the savings would be because we don't do an RFP on it. We have no idea.
Well, I'm okay with the amount, and so.
Any other comments on either of these? I feel fine where it is now. You okay with that?
Call the question.
Bob?
Call the question.
Councilmember Mott?
Yes.
I'm sorry, it's director.
Thank you. We don't have a motion yet, do we?
Yeah, we do.
Yes, we do.
Oh, what
But
is
it's directors.
Thank you, former Mayor.
Thank you.
Vasili.
You're welcome.
Director Ahmad?
Yes.
Director Vasili?
Yeah.
Director Grocott?
No.
Director Klein?
Yes.
And Chair Royce?
I think you should say yes.
Yes. I was talking.
And with that, adjourn the meeting. Jeff, thank you for all your work on that.
I voted, I better walk out.